Okay, picture this. What if the kid who got bullied for being quirkless was actually carrying the memories of one of the most terrifying demons in anime history? Kokushibo's moon breathing is straight-up nightmare fuel. We're talking about a guy who could slice you into ribbons from 50 meters away with crescent blades made of pure energy, see your heartbeat through walls, and had 400 years of sword mastery just sitting in his brain. He was so disgustingly overpowered that even other demons were scared of him. Now imagine sweet, anxious Deku suddenly remembering all of that. The surgical precision, the killer instincts, the voice whispering, just end them quickly every time he fights. But here's the kicker, he's still got that pure hero heart, so now he's wrestling with godlike power while trying not to become the monster those memories came from. This story is pure chaos and I'm here for it. Hit that like button if you want to see how our cinnamon roll handles, having Upper Moon 1 living rent-free in his head. The Namu's hand wrapped around Izuku's throat like a steel trap. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The massive creature had appeared out of nowhere during the chaos at USJ, and now Tsuyu lay motionless against the concrete wall 10 feet away, blood trickling from her temple. The villain's laughter echoed through the facility as more students screamed in the distance. I have to do something, anything. But what could he do? His body refused to cooperate, pinned against the rubble by the Namu's impossible strength. All Might was fighting the other creature across the facility. No one was coming to help. Tsuyu stirred slightly and Izuku's heart lurched. She was trying to get up, trying to help him even though she could barely move. The Namu noticed too, its exposed brain pulsing as it turned those empty eyes toward her. No, the word came out as a wheeze. The creature's grip tightened and black spots danced across Izuku's vision. He was going to die here. They both were just another statistic in whatever sick game these villains were playing. But then something shifted. His lungs found air where there should have been none. Not much, just a thin thread of breath that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. The world tilted, colors bleeding into strange patterns, and suddenly Izuku could see everything. The Namu's muscle fibers, the way they contracted and expanded, the weak points where tendons connected to bone. The exact trajectory needed to, his body moved without conscious thought. One moment he was helpless against the rubble. The next, he was standing 3 feet away, the Namu's severed arm still twitching on the ground beside him. A thin line of silver light dissipated in the air where he'd what? Cut with what? The Namu stared at its missing limb, then at Izuku. It didn't scream, just tilted its head with that horrible blank expression. Izuku stared too, at his hands, which had moved in patterns he'd never learned, at the way his breathing had settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and achingly familiar, at the impossible crescent of light that had carved through flesh and bone like they were paper. The regeneration kicked in before he could process what had happened. The Namu's arm rebuilt itself in seconds, muscle and skin flowing back together. But it didn't attack again. Instead, it took a step backward, head tilted like it was listening to something only it could hear. Then it was gone, warping away through one of Kurogiri's portals as the villains began their retreat. Izuku collapsed. The medical bay at UA was too bright, too clean, too quiet. Recovery Girl bustled around him with her usual efficiency, but Izuku barely registered her presence. His mind felt like it was full of static, fragments of memory that belonged to someone else flickering at the edges of his consciousness. Moonlight on a blade, the taste of blood. A brother's shadow stretching endlessly ahead, Midoriya. All Might's voice cut through the haze. When he arrived, Izuku blinked, trying to focus on the man's worried expression. "How are you feeling, my boy?" I'm okay, the words felt thick in his mouth. Is everyone safe? All Might sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with his injury. Thanks to you, according to Asui. She said you saved her from that Namu. Izuku's stomach twisted. Tsuyu, right, she'd been unconscious when it happened, hadn't she? So she couldn't have seen exactly what he'd done. My quirk, it must have evolved under stress. Sometimes that happens, right? The lie felt wrong on his tongue, but what was he supposed to say? I think I'm remembering someone else's life, and that someone knew how to kill things with moonlight. All Might studied his face for a long moment. The energy signature we detected was unusual, not like anything I've seen before. Unusual how? Precise, surgical. All Might's voice was careful, neutral. The Namu's arm was severed cleanly at 3 separate joints simultaneously. That level of control requires either years of training or what? Or someone who's done it before. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Izuku could feel All Might's gaze on him, searching for something. some sign of what he'd really done out there, but Izuku didn't have answers, just fragments. A face in a mirror that wasn't quite his own. The weight of a sword that had never existed, the bitter taste of envy that belonged to someone else's heart. "I don't understand it either," he said finally, and that, at least, was true. All Might nodded slowly, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. "These things happen sometimes. Quirks can surprise us when we need them most." He stood, adjusting his suit jacket. "Get some rest, young Midoriya. We'll talk more when you're feeling better." After he left, Izuku stared at the ceiling for a long time. The static in his head was getting worse, bringing with it flashes of things that couldn't be real. Training grounds that looked nothing like UA opponents who moved too fast to follow. A voice, his own voice, but older, colder, saying things he'd never say. "I will not die here, not like this." But he wasn't dying. He was lying in a hospital bed, perfectly safe. So why did those words feel like they belonged to him? The UA library was nearly empty at this hour. Most students were still in their dorms, probably talking about the attack or trying not to think about it. Izuku had always preferred the quiet anyway. He'd been here for 2 hours, searching through digital archives for anything related to breathing techniques or ancient combat arts. Most of what he found was useless: meditation guides, historical reenactment manuals, scholarly papers on pre-quirk martial traditions. Nothing that explained what had happened to him, but buried deep in a collection of historical documents, he found something interesting. Pre-quirk combat traditions of Japan. A survey of surviving techniques had exactly 2 paragraphs about breathing-based fighting styles. Among the more esoteric practices recorded from the pre-quirk era are various breath-focused combat techniques. While most historical accounts dismiss these as ceremonial or meditative practices, several sources describe combat applications that produced effects similar to modern quirk usage. The most detailed records come from the Taisho period, referencing individuals who could enhance physical capabilities through controlled breathing patterns. Of particular note are references to a family name, Tsujukuni, associated with exceptional swordsmanship and techniques that cut with the breath itself. However, detailed records of these practices were largely lost during the societal upheaval that accompanied the emergence of quirks. Tsujukuni. The name hit him like a physical blow. Not recognition, exactly, more like an echo of recognition. Like hearing someone call your name from another room. Izuku's hands shook as he typed the name into the search engine. More fragments appeared. Census records from the late 1800s. A few scattered mentions in historical texts. And then, buried in a digitized collection of Meiji-era documents, something that made his blood run cold. A death record, Tsujukuni Michikatsu. Cause of death, unknown, status, missing, and below it a note in faded ink, last seen pursuing demon-related incidents. Investigation abandoned due to lack of evidence. Demons. Before quirks, people had believed in demons. Izuku closed the laptop and sat back in his chair, mind reeling. It wasn't possible. Reincarnation was the stuff of fantasy novels and old folklore. People didn't just remember past lives. They didn't inherit supernatural abilities from dead strangers, but as he sat there in the quiet library, he could feel something stirring in his chest. A rhythm that wasn't quite his heartbeat. A pattern of breath that felt as natural as walking. He made his decision. The rooftop was deserted as he'd hoped. The night air was cool against his skin, carrying the distant sounds of the city. Izuku stood at the edge, looking out over the lights, and tried to remember what his body had done at USJ. The breathing came first. Deep, controlled, following a pattern that felt like muscle memory. His heartbeat slowed and the world sharpened around him. Not the overwhelming clarity from before, just a subtle shift in perception, like adjusting the focus on a camera. Then he moved. His arms swept in a wide arc, following the same motion from the fight. Nothing happened for a moment, and Izuku felt a stab of disappointment. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the crescent blade materialized 6 inches from his hand, a thin line of silver light that lasted for barely a second before dissolving. But it was there. Real. Sharp enough that when it faded, the concrete at his feet bore a clean slice an inch deep. Izuku stared at the mark, then at his hand. He could do it again if he wanted. He could feel the potential coiled in his chest, waiting for the right breath, the right movement. He could also feel something else. A presence in the back of his mind that whispered in his own voice, "More. You can do so much more." The voice was eager. Hungry, it remembered things, techniques that could level buildings, precision that could stop a heart without breaking the skin. It remembered power and the intoxicating rush of being stronger than everyone else. it remembered being proud. Izuku clenched his fist and forced the breathing to stop. The presence retreated, but it didn't disappear, just settled deeper, waiting. He looked out over the city lights and made himself a promise. He would learn to control this, whatever it was. He would figure out what had happened to Tsujukuni Michikatsu and why his memories were living in Izuku's head. And he would make sure that whatever had driven the man to disappear, whatever had made him powerful enough to be erased from history, would never happen again. The moon hung low on the horizon, casting everything in silver light. For just a moment, it felt like coming home. Then Izuku turned his back on it and went inside. 5:30 a.m. came too early, but Izuku was already awake. He'd been having the dreams again. Not nightmares, exactly, more like watching someone else's memories through a scratched film reel. Training sequences that went on for hours, opponents who moved like water and struck like lightning, and always the feeling that he was supposed to be better than this. Faster, stronger, more. The rooftop was becoming familiar territory. 3 days since USJ, 3 mornings of sneaking up here while the rest of the dorms slept. He'd gotten good at moving quietly, another skill that felt borrowed rather than learned. Izuku took his position at the center of the space and closed his eyes. The breathing pattern came easier now. Deep inhale, hold for 4 counts, exhale in a controlled stream that seemed to flow through his entire body rather than just his lungs. His heartbeat settled into a steady rhythm, and the world around him sharpened. He could hear Kaminari's alarm clock through 3 floors of concrete, feel the vibration of the morning train 2 miles away. Sense the exact moment when his body reached the state he was looking for, that strange equilibrium where strength and speed and precision all balanced on the edge of his breath. Then he moved. The first form flowed out of him like water. His body traced patterns in the air that he'd never learned but somehow knew perfectly. Horizontal sweep, vertical rise, diagonal cut, each motion precise and economical and absolutely lethal if he'd been holding an actual blade. But he wasn't. That was the strange part. His empty hands carved crescents of silver light that dissipated almost immediately, leaving only faint traces in the air. Like he was performing sword forms with an invisible weapon, and occasionally that weapon decided to become visible. First form, Dark Moon, Evening Palace. The name appeared in his mind without invitation. Along with it came a flood of technical knowledge, optimal breathing rhythm, foot placement, the exact angle needed to generate maximum cutting force. It felt like reading an instruction manual written in his own handwriting. Izuku flowed into the second form without conscious thought. This one was faster, a spinning attack that generated multiple crescents in a wide arc. Second form, Pearl Flower Moongazing. The silver lights hung in the air for almost 3 seconds this time, sharp enough that when they faded, the concrete bore a perfect grid of shallow cuts. He was getting stronger. That much was obvious. But it wasn't like normal quirk training, where you pushed yourself until you couldn't anymore. This felt more like remembering how to ride a bike, muscle memory clicking back into place after years of disuse. The third form required more precision. Third form, Loathsome Moon Chains. A series of rapid strikes that curved and interconnected, designed to trap an opponent's weapon or limb. Izuku's hands moved in the pattern, and this time the crescents held their shape long enough for him to actually see the chain-like formation they created. When he finished, he was breathing hard but not exhausted. More like he'd completed a warm-up routine rather than learning entirely new combat techniques. Which should have been impossible, but then again, most of what was happening to him should have been impossible. He sat down on the concrete, back against the rooftop access door, and tried to make sense of it all. The regeneration test had been last night. A shallow cut across his palm with a kitchen knife, nothing dramatic, just enough to see what would happen. He'd maintained the breathing pattern and watched the wound close over the course of 20 minutes, skin knitting itself back together without even leaving a scar. It wasn't instant healing like Recovery Girl's quirk. More like his body's natural repair mechanisms were running at triple speed, which meant injuries that would normally take days to heal might only take hours. Useful, but not invincible. He'd tested the limits with progressively deeper cuts, and anything that went past the muscle layer didn't regenerate much faster than normal. Good to know he wasn't completely unkillable. Though the fact that he'd thought to test that at all was probably concerning. The memories were getting stronger too, not just combat techniques but fragments of personality. Thoughts that felt like his but carried emotional weight he'd never earned, pride that bordered on arrogance. A deep, gnawing need to prove himself against anyone who claimed to be better. And underneath it all, a jealousy so bitter it made his teeth ache. He was always stronger, always faster. No matter how hard I trained, how perfect my technique became, he made it look effortless. The thought hit him with enough force to make him gasp. For just a moment, he could see a face, sharp features, gentle eyes, a smile that never quite reached its full potential because it was holding back too much power. Someone who mattered. Someone who Deku. Izuku spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. Uraraka stood in the doorway to the roof access, still in her pajamas, looking concerned and slightly confused. What are you doing up here? It's barely dawn. Izuku scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't sound completely insane. Couldn't sleep, thought some fresh air might help. She stepped onto the roof, closing the door behind her. Bad dreams? That was closer to the truth than she knew. Something like that. Uraraka walked over to where he was sitting and settled down beside him, not quite touching but close enough that he could smell her shampoo. Want to talk about it? Yes, part of him wanted to say. I think I'm remembering someone else's life, and that someone was incredibly powerful and incredibly angry, and I don't know if those memories are changing me or if I was always this way and just never noticed. Instead, he said, it's complicated. Most things are. She was quiet for a moment, looking out over the city as it slowly woke up. You've seemed different since USJ, more, I don't know, focused. Like you're carrying something heavy. Izuku winced. If Uraraka had noticed, other people probably had too. He'd been hoping the changes were subtle enough to fly under the radar, at least until he figured out what was happening to him. I'm fine, he said, which was both true and completely inadequate, just processing everything that happened. We all are, Uraraka's voice was soft, but you don't have to process it alone, you know. That's what friends are for. The sincerity in her voice made something twist in his chest. Friends, right, he had those now. People who actually cared what happened to him, who noticed when he was acting strange and wanted to help. The problem was he wasn't entirely sure who him was anymore. Combat training that afternoon was a disaster, not because Izuku performed badly, quite the opposite. He moved through the exercise with a fluid precision that turned heads and raised eyebrows. Every step perfectly placed, every strike economical and devastating. He dismantled his training robot in under 30 seconds using nothing but hand-to-hand combat, and the way he did it looked less like a student learning and more like a master demonstrating. What the hell was that? Bakugo's voice cut across the training ground like a whip crack. Izuku looked up from the smoking remains of his target robot. Everyone was staring at him, classmates, training robots temporarily forgotten. Even Aizawa had paused his patrol of the exercise area to watch. What do you mean? But Izuku knew exactly what Bakugo meant. The way he'd moved felt different even to him, more controlled, more lethal. Like his body had been optimized for violence in ways his conscious mind didn't fully understand. That wasn't your fighting style. Bakugo stalked closer, explosions popping in his palms. You don't move like that, you're clumsy. You overthink everything, you don't, he gestured at the demolished robot. You don't fight like a goddamn assassin. The word hit harder than Bakugo probably intended. Assassin, was that what he looked like now? Someone who killed for a living? You were never an assassin, whispered the voice in his head. You were something much worse. Bakugo, that's enough. Aizawa appeared between them before either could escalate further. Midoriya, good work on the exercise. Everyone else back to your targets. But as the class reluctantly returned to training, Izuku caught the look Aizawa gave him, evaluating, suspicious. The same expression All Might had worn in the medical bay. They knew something was different, they just didn't know what. Your quirk signature is changing. All Might's voice was carefully neutral, but Izuku could hear the concern underneath. They were in the empty classroom All Might used for private training sessions, late enough that the hallways were deserted. Changing how? Izuku asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew the answer. More refined. More controlled. All Might pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. At USJ, your energy output was chaotic, typical for a quirk under extreme stress, but in today's combat training it was precise, surgical. Like you've been practicing advanced techniques for years. There wasn't really a good way to deny that. Izuku had felt the difference himself, the way his body moved with newfound confidence, the combat instincts that seemed to come from nowhere. Sometimes quirks develop in response to trauma, he said. Maybe USJ triggered something that was already there. Maybe. All Might's tone suggested he wasn't buying it. But I've seen many quirks, young Midoriya. Evolution, mutation, even complete transformation. What you're displaying doesn't fit any of those patterns. The silence stretched between them. Izuku could feel All Might's gaze weighing him, measuring him against some internal standard. Finally, the older man leaned forward. I need you to be honest with me. Have you been training somewhere else, learning techniques that weren't part of your original quirk? Yes, Izuku thought, in dreams. In muscle memory that belongs to someone else, in forms that feel more natural than walking. No, he said out loud. All Might studied his face for a long moment, then sighed. I want to believe you. You've given me no reason to doubt your character, but power without understanding is dangerous, and power with secrets. He shook his head. Power with secrets is worse. I'm not hiding anything dangerous. Aren't you? All Might's voice was gentler now, almost sad. Midoriya, I've been planning to pass my quirk to you since the day we met. One for all is a sacred trust, passed from hero to hero for generations. But I can't give that kind of power to someone whose abilities I don't understand. The words hit like a physical blow. One for all, the quirk he'd dreamed about since childhood, the power that would let him become a real hero. All Might was considering taking it away. I'm still me, Izuku said quietly. Whatever's happening with my quirk, I'm still the same person who wants to save people. Are you? All Might's question was almost a whisper, because the boy I met 10 months ago would have told me the truth by now. That night, Izuku lay in his dorm room staring at the ceiling until nearly dawn. All Might was right, he was keeping secrets. Dangerous ones. But what was he supposed to say? That he was remembering someone else's life, that those memories came with techniques that could probably kill most of his classmates without breaking a sweat. The dreams had been getting worse, more vivid, more personal. He was starting to remember a name, Michikatsu, and with it, a flood of emotions that belonged to someone else. Jealousy, pride. A desperate need to prove himself against someone who would always be better. Someone who shared his face but carried himself like he'd never doubted anything in his life. You could be like him, the voice whispered. You have the technique now. The power, all you need is the will to use it. But that was the problem, wasn't it? The power came with strings attached. It wanted things. It remembered being stronger, faster, more deadly than anyone had a right to be. And part of Izuku, a part that was growing stronger each day, wanted to give in to that. To stop holding back and show everyone exactly what he could do. He rolled over and pressed his face into his pillow, trying to block out the voice. Outside his window, the moon was almost full, casting silver light across his floor. It looked like home. The fourth form was trying to kill him. Izuku crouched on the rooftop, sweat dripping onto the concrete despite the cool morning air. He'd been at this for an hour, trying to recreate that moment of perfect clarity from USJ. The breathing pattern was right, he was sure of it. The stance felt correct. But every time he reached for that state of enhanced perception, it slipped away like smoke. Fourth form, solar ring, moon. The name sat in his mind like a puzzle piece that almost fit but not quite. He knew the movements, could trace the pattern in the air with mechanical precision. But the technique felt hollow without the awareness that should accompany it. At USJ, the world had opened up like a flower. He'd seen through the Namu's skin to its muscle structure, tracked the flow of blood through its veins, identified weak points with surgical accuracy. That level of perception should have been impossible, but it had felt as natural as breathing. Now nothing, just the normal world, stubbornly refusing to reveal its secrets. Izuku closed his eyes and tried to remember the exact sensation, the way his breathing had shifted from shallow panic to something deeper. The moment when desperation had given way to ice-cold focus. The feeling of looking at the world and seeing its underlying structure laid bare, 30 seconds of controlled breathing to enter. The knowledge arrived without fanfare, like remembering where he'd left his keys. 30 seconds of a specific pattern, not the normal rhythm he'd been using for combat forms, but something more complex, more deliberate. He settled into position and began to count. The first 10 seconds felt normal. His heartbeat slowed, muscles relaxed, breathing fell into the new pattern. The second 10 seconds brought a strange tingling sensation, like his entire nervous system was shifting into a higher gear. By the 25th second, the world started to change. Colors bled away first, leaving everything in shades of silver and black. Then the overlays began, faint lines that traced the structural weak points of the rooftop access door, the exact trajectory a falling leaf would take in the morning breeze, the optimal angle to strike the practice dummy he'd borrowed from the gym. 30 seconds, the world exploded into clarity. Izuku could see through everything. The concrete beneath his feet became transparent, revealing the steel support beams that held the building together. The walls dissolved, showing him the sleeping forms of his classmates 3 floors below. Every living thing within a 100-meter radius lit up like a constellation, their circulatory systems mapped in brilliant detail. And in that moment of perfect perception, he understood exactly how fragile they all were. Uraraka was directly below him, curled up on her side in bed. He could see her heart beating, count the rhythm of her pulse, trace the flow of blood through arteries that would part like silk if struck at the right angle. Ida was 2 rooms over, lying on his back with military precision even in sleep. The major artery in his neck was exposed, unprotected, practically begging for Izuku gasped and the vision shattered. He found himself on his hands and knees, dry heaving onto the concrete. The normal world looked dull and flat after what he'd just experienced, like someone had turned down the contrast on reality itself. But more than that, he felt sick at his own thoughts. Those hadn't been analytical observations about anatomy, they'd been targeting assessments. His mind had automatically cataloged the most efficient ways to kill his sleeping friends, and part of him had found the information satisfying. "That's what this power is for," whispered the voice in his head. "Not protection, not rescue, precision killing." Izuku pushed himself upright and stumbled toward the roof access door. He needed to get away from here, away from the temptation to use that sight again. Because now that he knew how to activate it deliberately, he could feel it lurking at the edge of his consciousness. All that terrible knowledge, just a 30-second breathing exercise away. The problem was, he also knew he'd use it again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because that level of awareness was addictive in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with understanding. For those few seconds, he'd seen the world as it really was. Everything else felt like looking through frosted glass. "You're late." Gran Torino's voice cracked like a whip across the agency's cramped office space. The old hero stood barely 5 feet tall, but something about his presence made the room feel smaller, like he was taking up more space than physics should allow. "Sorry," Izuku mumbled, still shaking off the aftereffects of his morning's training. "Lost track of time. Heroes don't lose track of time. Heroes are where they need to be when they need to be there." Gran Torino fixed him with a stare that seemed to see straight through him. "Speaking of which, what's this I hear about your quirk evolving?" Of course, All Might had told him. Izuku should have expected that. "It's complicated. Most things are. Doesn't mean they can't be explained." Gran Torino gestured toward a pair of chairs. "Sit, talk, and don't give me any of that stress-induced development nonsense Toshinori mentioned. I've been doing this longer than you've been alive, kid. I know the difference between quirk evolution and something else entirely." Izuku sat, mind racing. How much should he reveal? How much could he reveal without sounding completely insane? "My fighting style has been changing," he said carefully. "More precise, more efficient." Efficient. Gran Torino rolled the word around like he was tasting it. "That's one way to put it. The footage from your combat training looks like someone replaced a student with a professional killer. Very clean work." The casual way he said it made Izuku's stomach drop. "I'm not. Relax. I didn't say you were actually a killer, just that you move like one." Gran Torino leaned back in his chair. "Question is, where did you learn techniques like that? Because they sure as hell didn't come from UACE curriculum." Before Izuku could answer, an alarm started blaring from the police scanner on Gran Torino's desk. The old hero was across the room in a blur of movement that seemed to ignore basic laws of physics. Bank robbery in progress, multiple hostages, suspects armed with hardening quirks. He was already reaching for his costume. "Looks like your field test just moved up the schedule. Try not to die." The Musutafu First National Bank was a fortress of steel and concrete, designed to withstand both quirk attacks and conventional explosives. Right now, it looked like someone had been testing those defenses with mixed results. The front windows were spiderwebbed with cracks, and scorch marks decorated the walls where the villains had fought their way inside. Police barriers held back a crowd of onlookers and news crews, but Izuku barely registered them. His attention was locked on the building, and more specifically, on what his enhanced senses could tell him about the situation inside. He'd activated the transparent world during their approach, despite his misgivings about using it again so soon. The 30-second breathing sequence had become second nature after this morning's training, and the clarity that followed was just as overwhelming as before. Through the bank's walls, he could see everything. 3 villains with stone-like skin modifications, probably the hardening quirks the police had mentioned. 12 hostages clustered in the main lobby, most of them on their knees with their hands behind their heads. And in the vault area, a 4th figure who moved differently, smoother, more dangerous. The leader then, the one calling the shots. "What's your assessment?" Gran Torino's voice was barely above a whisper, but Izuku heard it clearly. 4 targets, 3 with defensive quirks in the main area, 1 in the back who's probably the primary threat. Hostages are grouped together, which makes extraction complicated but not impossible. The tactical analysis flowed out of him without conscious thought. The hardening quirks will make direct confrontation difficult, but they'll have weak points. Joints, probably, maybe pressure points if we can get close enough. Gran Torino gave him a sharp look. And how exactly do you plan to identify those weak points? Izuku realized his mistake a second too late. Normal heroes couldn't see through walls, couldn't map out enemy vulnerabilities from 100 meters away. He just revealed information he shouldn't have had access to. Lucky guess, he tried. Kid, I've been in this business for 60 years. There's no such thing as lucky guesses this accurate. Gran Torino's expression was unreadable. But we'll discuss your miraculous tactical abilities later. Right now, we've got civilians to save. The entry was a masterpiece of coordinated movement that Izuku found himself following without conscious thought. Gran Torino created a distraction at the front entrance, his bounce-based quirk turning him into a ricocheting blur that drew all three hardened villains toward the lobby. That left Izuku free to approach from the side, where his enhanced perception had identified a service entrance with a clear path to the hostages. The lock on the service door posed exactly zero challenge. His hands moved in patterns he'd never learned, applying pressure to specific points until the mechanism gave way with a barely audible click. Another borrowed skill, apparently. He was starting to wonder what the original owner of these memories hadn't been capable of. Inside, he moved through shadows that seemed to bend around him, each step placed with absolute precision. The transparent world showed him everything: the exact location of each hostage, the position of the remaining villain in the vault area, the structural weak points he could exploit if necessary. But it also showed him something else. The hostages weren't just scared, they were injured. The villain leader had been using them to test his quirk, leaving burns and cuts that spoke of casual cruelty. An elderly man near the back of the group was bleeding from a head wound that looked serious. That changed things. Izuku ghosted through the bank's interior until he had a clear line of sight on the vault area. The villain leader was exactly where his enhanced senses had placed him, a tall man with a patchwork appearance, skin grafted in uneven sections that suggested multiple quirks or serious surgical modification. He was focused on the sounds of combat from the lobby, back turned to Izuku's position. Perfect. The fourth form flowed out of him like water, his body moving through the sequence with mechanical precision. Solar ring, moon. Multiple crescents of silver light traced complex patterns through the air, each one aimed not to kill but to incapacitate. Pressure points along the spine, nerve clusters in the shoulders, the exact angles needed to sever tendons without causing permanent damage. The villain dropped like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hit the floor. Izuku was already moving toward the hostages when Gran Torino appeared in the doorway, having dealt with the other three villains in record time. The old hero took in the scene, the unconscious leader, the precise nature of the injuries that had taken him down, the way Izuku was positioned to have made those strikes from an impossible angle. Surgical, Gran Torino said quietly, just like Toshinori mentioned. They got the hostages out without further incident, paramedics rushing to treat the injured while police secured the unconscious villains. Izuku found himself standing apart from the bustle, watching the old man with the head wound being loaded into an ambulance. The injury wasn't life-threatening. He could tell that much from his enhanced perception, but it would have been without medical attention. How many people had he saved today? 12 hostages, plus whoever might have been hurt if the situation had escalated. That should have felt good. Heroic. Like vindication of his choice to use these borrowed abilities for protection rather than harm. Instead, he felt hollow, because part of him, the part that remembered being someone else, had wanted to aim those crescents a few inches higher. Had cataloged exactly how to kill the villain leader in a dozen different ways before settling on the merciful option. Had found the restraint necessary rather than natural. "You're getting soft," whispered the voice in his head. In the old days, threats were eliminated permanently. It was cleaner that way. "Kid," Gran Torino's voice cut through his brooding. The old hero was watching him with an expression that mixed concern and calculation. That was good work in there, professional level, the kind of precision that takes years to develop. A pause. "Want to tell me where you really learned to fight like that?" Izuku looked at his hands, still steady despite everything, still ready to trace those deadly patterns if needed. "I don't think you'd believe me. Try me. I've seen stranger things than teenage prodigies with mysterious skill sets." For a moment, Izuku considered it. Gran Torino had decades of experience, had worked with All Might during the early days of his career. If anyone might understand the situation, it would be him. But then he remembered the way his enhanced perception had automatically identified kill shots, the casual ease with which his borrowed instincts had assessed the hostages as potential collateral damage. The growing certainty that whoever Tsujukuni Michikatsu had been, he hadn't been a hero. "It's complicated," he said instead. Gran Torino studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "They usually are. But complications have a way of catching up with you, kid. Better to deal with them before they deal with you." As they headed back toward the agency, Izuku caught sight of his reflection in a storefront window. For just a second, the face looking back at him seemed older, sharper. The eyes held a coldness that had nothing to do with his actual personality and everything to do with someone else's memories. He was changing. The techniques were just the beginning. What really worried him was how natural the violence felt. How right it seemed to solve problems with surgical precision rather than overwhelming force. That night, alone in his dorm room, he finally worked up the courage to search for more information about Tsujukuni Michikatsu. What he found made his blood run cold. The historical records were fragmentary, but they painted a clear picture. Michikatsu had been a demon slayer initially, one of the strongest of his generation. But jealousy of his younger brother had driven him to make a deal with demons themselves, transforming him into something called an upper rank. A creature that had spent centuries killing the very people he'd once protected. Izuku stared at the screen until his eyes burned, trying to process the implications. The memories weren't from a fallen hero or a misguided warrior. They were from a monster who had betrayed everything he'd once stood for. And now those memories were living in Izuku's head, whispering about efficiency and permanent solutions. Growing stronger every day. Outside his window, the moon was waxing toward full, casting silver light across his floor. It looked beautiful and terrible and completely alien. It looked like inheritance. Katsuki Bakugo was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He'd noticed the changes in Deku immediately, the way he moved with newfound confidence, how his fighting style had shifted from desperate improvisation to surgical precision. Most people would have chalked it up to quirk development or intensive training. Most people weren't Bakugo. He knew Izuku Midoriya better than anyone else alive, had been watching him for over a decade. He knew every nervous tick, every unconscious habit, every tell that revealed what the nerd was really thinking. And right now, every single one of those tells was screaming that Deku was hiding something massive. Which was why Bakugo found himself crouched behind the rooftop access housing at 5:30 in the morning, watching his childhood friend practice what looked like sword forms with an invisible blade. The movements were beautiful in a way that made Bakugo's teeth clench. Fluid and precise, each motion flowing into the next without waste or hesitation. This wasn't someone learning new techniques, this was someone who had mastered them so completely that they'd become second nature. But Deku had never touched a sword in his life. Bakugo watched him transition from one form to another, body tracing patterns that seemed to bend physics around them. And then the air began to shimmer. Silver light bloomed around Deku's hands, coalescing into crescent shapes that hung in the air for several seconds before dissolving. As they faded, Bakugo caught sight of the marks they left behind, perfect cuts in the concrete, each one deep enough to sever rebar. What the hell? He'd seen the footage from USJ, of course. Everyone had. The official story was that Deku's quirk had evolved under stress, developing new applications that allowed for ranged attacks. Plausible enough, stranger things happened during life-or-death situations. But this looked like someone who had been practicing these techniques for years. The kind of muscle memory that only came from endless repetition, from understanding a fighting style so deeply that it became instinctive. Deku finished his routine and sat down heavily, breathing hard. In the growing dawn light, Bakugo could see the strain on his face, not just physical exhaustion, but something deeper. Like he was carrying a weight that threatened to crush him. Part of Bakugo wanted to confront him right there, demand answers to the questions that had been eating at him since USJ. But a larger part was afraid of what those answers might be. Because if Deku had been hiding abilities like this, what else was he hiding? Bakugo waited until his former friend disappeared back into the dorms before emerging from his hiding spot. The rooftop bore the evidence of the training session, dozens of precise cuts arranged in complex patterns, each one exactly as deep as the others. The kind of control that should have been impossible for someone who'd allegedly just developed these abilities. He knelt beside one of the marks and ran his finger along its edge. Clean, surgical. The concrete hadn't been blasted apart or melted, it had been cut with something sharper than any blade he'd ever seen. You move like a killer now. The thought had been nagging at him ever since their combat training exercise. Deku's fighting style had shifted from chaotic determination to something cold and methodical. He didn't just defeat his opponents anymore, he dismantled them with the kind of precision that spoke of intimate knowledge of human anatomy. It should have been impressive. Instead, it was terrifying. Because the Deku that Bakugo knew wouldn't have that kind of knowledge. Wouldn't move through combat scenarios like he was cataloging the most efficient ways to end lives. The Deku he knew was soft, hesitant, more concerned with helping people than hurting them. So who was the person he'd been watching for the past week? The confrontation came sooner than Bakugo had planned. He'd intended to gather more evidence, maybe catch Deku in a bigger lie before calling him out. But during their afternoon sparring session, watching Deku flow through combat forms that looked more like a deadly dance than hero training, his patience finally snapped. What the hell was that? The words exploded out of him before he could think better of them. Deku froze mid-movement, turning to look at him with wide eyes. What do you mean? Don't. Bakugo's hands sparked with barely contained explosions. Don't you dare play dumb with me. That technique, the way you're moving, this isn't your quirk. The rest of the class had stopped their own training to watch, sensing the tension crackling between them. Deku glanced around nervously, clearly aware they had an audience. I don't know what you're talking about. Bullshit. Bakugo stepped closer, voice rising. You think I'm stupid, Deku? You think I haven't been paying attention? This isn't quirk evolution, this is something else entirely. Bakugo, please, you move like a killer now. The words came out quieter, but they hit with the force of physical blows. Clean, precise. Like you know exactly where to strike to put someone down permanently. Where the hell did you learn that? Deku's face went white, and for just a moment, Bakugo saw something flicker in his eyes. Something cold and calculating that had no business being in Izuku Midoriya's expression. That's enough. Aizawa's voice cut across the training ground like a blade. Their teacher appeared between them with that unsettling speed of his, capture weapon already partially deployed. Both of you cooling off period, now, his eyes fixed on Bakugo. And you, whatever issues you have with Midoriya's development, you address them through proper channels, not public confrontations. Bakugo wanted to argue, to demand that Aizawa see what was right in front of him. But the expression on their teacher's face brooked no argument. With a final glare at Deku, he stalked off toward the locker rooms. Behind him, he heard Aizawa addressing the rest of the class. Back to work. Nothing to see here, but there was something to see. Bakugo was sure of it, and if no one else was going to ask the hard questions, then he'd find the answers himself. The night patrol was supposed to be routine. Izuku walked alongside Manuel, the professional hero who'd agreed to let him observe a standard patrol route through Hosu City's commercial district. It was part of his internship requirements, seeing how real heroes handled day-to-day peacekeeping when the cameras weren't rolling. He'd been grateful for the distraction. Bakugo's confrontation that afternoon had shaken him more than he cared to admit. His childhood friend was getting too close to the truth, asking questions that Izuku couldn't answer without revealing everything. And he wasn't ready for that, not yet. You're quiet tonight, Manuel observed as they walked past a row of closed shops. Everything all right, just processing the training from today, Izuku replied, which was technically true. He was processing it specifically, processing how badly he'd let his guard down in front of his classmates. Manuel nodded. Hero work can be overwhelming at first. The important thing is too, the explosion cut him off mid-sentence. 3 blocks away, orange light bloomed against the night sky as something, a building, maybe, or a gas main, went up in flames. The sound that followed was wrong somehow, not the sharp crack of conventional explosives, but something more organic. Like the city itself was screaming. Manuel was already moving, speaking rapidly into his communicator. This is Manuel reporting explosion in Sector 7, requesting immediate backup and another explosion closer this time. Then another, a pattern was emerging. The blasts were moving through the district in a systematic way, working outward from a central point. Not random destruction, but a coordinated attack. Villains, Manuel said grimly. Multiple targets, area effect quirks, this is bad. They rounded a corner and saw the source of the devastation. 3 figures in dark clothing stood in the middle of an intersection, their hands wreathed in destructive energy. Around them, buildings had been reduced to rubble, their facades simply gone, as if something had reached out and erased them from existence. And scattered among the debris were people. Civilians who'd been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, some moving, some not. A woman trapped under a concrete beam was calling weakly for help. An elderly man sat against a collapsed wall, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Decay quirks, Manuel breathed. All three of them, how is that possible? Izuku's enhanced senses, activated automatically in response to the crisis, supplied the answer. The villains weren't using natural quirks. He could see the artificial modifications, the surgical scars where foreign tissue had been grafted onto their bodies. Someone had given them these abilities. But more importantly, he could see the pattern of their attack. The way they were systematically destroying everything in expanding circles, forcing civilians to flee in predictable directions. This wasn't random violence, it was hurting. They were driving people towards something, or someone. We need to evacuate the area, Manuel said, already reaching for his phone. Get the pros here with area denial capabilities, maybe someone who can counter. There's no time. Izuku was moving before he'd consciously made the decision, his body following tactical instincts that belonged to someone else. The villains had just targeted a family restaurant, and through the transparent walls he could see a dozen people trapped inside as the building's structure began to fail. Manuel shouted something behind him, but Izuku was beyond hearing. The world had shifted into that crystalline clarity that came with the transparent world, and with it came the knowledge of exactly what needed to be done. Fifth form, Moon's spirit calamitous eddy. The name whispered through his mind as his body moved through the sequence. This was a higher form than he'd ever attempted, requiring perfect breath control and absolute precision. One mistake in the technique would tear him apart from the inside. But the trapped civilians didn't have time for him to doubt himself. The crescents that erupted from his movements were massive, each one large enough to span a city block. They spun through the air in a complex pattern, weaving between buildings with impossible accuracy. One severed the support beam that was about to crush the trapped family. Another carved a path through the rubble that gave the injured woman a clear escape route. A third intercepted the villain who'd been moving to finish off the elderly man, striking him in pressure points that dropped him instantly. In the space of 5 seconds, Izuku had neutralized all three threats and created safe paths for every civilian in the area. He realized with dawning horror, had done it in front of about 50 onlookers with camera phones. The silence that followed was deafening. Civilians stared at him with expressions ranging from awe to terror. Manuel looked like he'd seen a ghost. And in the distance, Izuku could hear sirens approaching, more heroes responding to what was now a much larger situation than anyone had expected. Someone in the crowd raised their phone higher, clearly recording. Within minutes, the footage would be online. Within hours, it would be viral. By tomorrow morning, every hero agency in Japan would be analyzing the techniques he'd just used. The lunar hero, that's what they'd call him. He could already see the headlines, the breathless speculation about the mysterious quirk user who'd appeared out of nowhere with impossible abilities. His secret was out, all of it. Kid, Manuel's voice was tight with a mixture of admiration and concern. I don't know what the hell you just did, but you need to call your supervisor, right now. Izuku's phone was already buzzing. All Might's contact information flashing on the screen. He let it ring. The emergency faculty meeting took place at 2 in the morning in Principal Nezu's office with all the blinds drawn. Izuku sat in the center of the room while the adults who'd shaped his hero education stared at him with expressions ranging from concern to outright suspicion. The footage had already made the rounds. Professional analysis of his techniques, frame-by-frame breakdowns of movements that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age. The internet was calling him everything from the next symbol of peace to a potential villain in disguise. So, Principal Nezu said quietly, his small hands folded in front of him. Would you like to explain to us how you developed abilities that our combat analysis department has classified as master level, when according to our records, you've been attending UA for less than a year? Izuku looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his teachers. Aizawa's expression was unreadable. Midnight looked genuinely worried. Present Mike seemed torn between excitement and confusion, and All Might looked heartbroken. You've been lying to me, the symbol of peace said softly. To everyone, that level of skill isn't self-taught, and it certainly isn't quirk evolution. So tell me, young Midoriya, what exactly are you? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Izuku could feel the expectations, the demands for truth, the growing certainty that anything less than complete honesty would result in his immediate expulsion. He thought about the research he'd done, the historical fragments that painted Kokushibo as a monster. He thought about the voice in his head that whispered about permanent solutions and the satisfaction of perfect technique. He thought about the way his enhanced senses automatically cataloged kill shots, even when looking at his friends. He thought about Bakugo's words, "You move like a killer now." "It's complicated," he said finally. "Complicated doesn't endanger civilians," Aizawa said sharply. "Complicated doesn't require master-level combat techniques that you shouldn't have access to. Complicated doesn't, I remember things." The words came out in a rush, cutting off Aizawa's lecture. "Things that happened before I was born. Fighting techniques, combat experience, knowledge that belongs to someone else." The silence that followed was profound. "Reincarnation," Principal Nezu said eventually, his tone carefully neutral. "You're claiming to have memories from a previous life. I know how it sounds, but I can prove it." Izuku looked up at All Might, desperation creeping into his voice. "The historical records, the techniques I've been using, they match patterns from 400 years ago, before quirks existed." "Before quirks," Midnight repeated slowly. "You're saying you remember the pre-quirk era? Not all of it. Just fragments, combat training, fighting styles, the end of." He paused, trying to figure out how to explain Kokushibo's transformation without revealing the full horror of it. "The end of someone who was very strong." All Might leaned forward. "Strong how?" And there it was, the question that would determine everything. Because the truth was that Kokushibo hadn't just been strong, he'd been a monster. A creature who'd betrayed everything he'd once stood for in pursuit of power and recognition. But Izuku wasn't Kokushibo. He wasn't driven by jealousy or pride or the need to prove himself superior to everyone else. He was driven by the desire to save people, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The techniques were just tools. What mattered was how he chose to use them. "Strong enough to make a difference," he said finally. "Strong enough to save people." Principal Nezu studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll need documentation, historical research to verify your claims, full psychological evaluation to ensure these memories aren't affecting your judgment, and complete disclosure of all abilities you've developed. And if I refuse, then you'll be expelled immediately and flagged as a potential security threat." Nezu's voice was gentle but implacable. "I'm sorry, Midoriya, but the safety of our students and the public comes first. We can't have someone with unknown capabilities operating without oversight." Izuku looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of people who'd believed in him, who'd trained him, supported him, seen him as a hero in training rather than a potential threat. All of that was about to change. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll tell you everything." Outside the window, the moon hung low on the horizon, nearly full. It cast silver light across the office, making everything look sharp and cold. It looked like judgment. The confession took 3 hours. Izuku sat in the center of Principal Nezu's office, surrounded by his teachers, and laid out everything he could remember. The fragments of memory that had started after USJ. The combat techniques that felt like muscle memory from another life. The growing certainty that those memories belonged to someone called Tsujukuni Michikatsu, a figure from Japan's pre-quirk era who had been erased from most historical records. He demonstrated the breathing forms, showing how his body moved through sequences he'd never learned. He explained the transparent world, the enhanced perception that let him see through solid objects and identify structural weak points. He even manifested several of the moonblade crescents, letting them dissipate harmlessly in the air above Nezu's desk. What he didn't explain was the voice in his head, the growing hunger for stronger opponents. The way his enhanced senses automatically cataloged the most efficient ways to kill everyone in the room. Some secrets were too dangerous to share. "Fascinating," Principal Nezu said when Izuku finally fell silent. The small creature had listened to everything with the intense focus of a predator evaluating prey. "And you believe these memories are genuine, not some form of psychological break triggered by trauma?" "The techniques work," Izuku said simply. "The historical details I remember match what little documentation still exists, and the combat knowledge, it's too complete, too systematic to be something my mind just invented." Aizawa leaned forward. "You said this Michikatsu figure was erased from historical records. What exactly do you mean by that?" This was the dangerous part. Izuku had spent hours trying to figure out how to explain Kokushibo's fall without revealing that he'd become a literal demon. The truth was too fantastical, too likely to make them think he was delusional. "He made enemies," Izuku said carefully, "powerful ones, the kind who could rewrite history to suit their purposes. From what I can piece together, he was involved in some kind of conflict that ended badly for everyone involved." "And you think his memories somehow transferred to you?" All Might said. His voice was carefully controlled, but Izuku could hear the hurt underneath. 4 centuries later, completely by chance. I don't know how it works, I just know that it happened. Izuku met his mentor's eyes, trying to project sincerity. I'm still me, All Might. These memories, these techniques, they don't change who I am or what I want to do with my life. Don't they? Midnight's voice was sharp. Because the footage from tonight shows someone who moves through combat scenarios like they've been killing for decades. That's not exactly standard hero behavior. The words hit harder than Izuku had expected. He'd been so focused on saving the civilians, on using his abilities to protect people, that he hadn't considered how his actions might look to outside observers. I didn't kill anyone, he said quietly. I could have, the knowledge is there, but I chose not to. This time, Aizawa said, what about next time? What about when you're facing a threat that pushes you past your limits? Will you still choose restraint, or will those borrowed instincts take over? Izuku didn't have a good answer for that. He wanted to say that he'd always choose the heroic path, that his moral compass was too strong to be swayed by inherited memories. But the truth was, those instincts were getting stronger. The voice in his head was becoming harder to ignore. What if Aizawa was right? What if there came a moment when the choice between victory and restraint pushed him over the edge? I understand your concerns, he said finally, but I'm not asking you to take this on faith. Monitor me, test me, put whatever safeguards you think are necessary in place. I'll prove that I can use these abilities responsibly. Principal Nezu exchanged glances with the other faculty members, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he nodded. Very well, here are our conditions. Complete psychological evaluation by our resident specialist. Weekly check-ins with a faculty member of our choosing. Full disclosure of any new abilities or memories that surface. And his expression grew serious. You'll need to provide some explanation to your classmates. They've seen the footage. They know something significant has changed. What kind of explanation? Simplified version. Ancestral memory quirk that activated during the USJ incident. No need to mention reincarnation or 400-year-old warriors. Most people aren't ready for that level of complexity. Izuku nodded, though the idea of lying to his friends sat poorly with him. He'd already kept too many secrets. Adding more felt like building a house of cards in a windstorm. There's one more thing, All Might said quietly. This conversation never happened. As far as official records are concerned, you experienced a quirk mutation that awakened dormant genetic memories. We can't have the media speculating about reincarnation and pre-quirk era warriors. It would cause mass hysteria. So I'm supposed to pretend this is normal. You're supposed to pretend it's explainable, Nezu corrected. There's a difference. Normal is relative. Explainable keeps society stable. As the meeting broke up, All Might lingered behind the others. When the room was empty except for the two of them, he turned to face Izuku directly. I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Izuku's stomach clenched. Okay. Are you still the person I chose to inherit One for All? The question hung in the air like a blade. Izuku could feel the weight of everything that rode on his answer, his future as a hero, his relationship with his mentor, his entire sense of identity. I don't know, he said finally. I'm changing. These memories, they're not just techniques. They come with perspectives, ways of thinking that don't always align with what I used to believe. All Might's face fell slightly. What kind of perspectives? Pragmatic ones. Efficient solutions to complex problems. The understanding that sometimes, Izuku struggled for words that wouldn't damn him completely, that sometimes mercy is a luxury you can't afford. And you agree with that understanding? I don't know, Izuku repeated, and the uncertainty in his voice was genuine. I want to say no. I want to believe that there's always another way, that heroes never have to compromise their ideals. But when I'm in the middle of a fight, when lives are on the line, those borrowed instincts make sense in a way that scares me. All Might was quiet for a long moment, studying Izuku's face like he was seeing him for the first time. One for All carries the hopes and dreams of 8 previous users, he said eventually. It's not just power, it's responsibility. The responsibility to be better than the darkness in the world, even when that darkness lives inside you. Are you saying you won't pass it to me? I'm saying I need to be sure you can handle it. Not just the power, but everything that comes with it. All Might moved toward the door, then paused. Get some rest, young Midoriya. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. After he left, Izuku sat alone in the empty office, surrounded by the silence and the weight of everything that had changed. Through the window, he could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the sky. By tonight, the entire world would know about the lunar hero. By tomorrow, his classmates would be looking at him differently, wondering what other secrets he might be hiding. The person he'd been yesterday, Izuku Midoriya, aspiring hero with an unremarkable quirk, was gone forever. What remained was something more complex, more dangerous, carrying the memories of a warrior who'd fallen so far from grace that history had erased him entirely. And despite everything, part of him was excited about what came next. That was the most frightening part of all. Class 1A had never been quiet for this long. Izuku stood at the front of the classroom, flanked by Aizawa and Principal Nezu, while 20 pairs of eyes stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The footage from last night had made the rounds. Everyone had seen it, analyzed it, probably stayed up half the night discussing what it might mean. Now they were about to get their answers. Sort of. As you're all aware, Principal Nezu began, his voice carrying easily through the silent room, Midoriya's quirk underwent significant development during recent events. What you saw in the footage represents abilities that were previously dormant, activated by extreme stress. Kirishima raised his hand tentatively. So like genetic memories. That's actually a thing, rare but documented, Aizawa said smoothly. Certain quirks carry inherited traits that can manifest under the right conditions, combat techniques, physical capabilities, even personality fragments from previous generations. It was a neat lie, wrapped in enough scientific terminology to sound plausible. Izuku could see some of his classmates buying it immediately. Kaminari looked like he was already imagining what kind of ancestral memories he might be carrying around. Others were more skeptical. Those weren't inherited techniques, Ida said carefully, his hand cutting through the air in precise gestures. The level of mastery, the systematic nature of the forms, that represents decades of training, not genetic echoes. Some ancestral memory quirks are more complete than others, Principal Nezu replied. In rare cases, the inherited knowledge can be remarkably comprehensive. Todoroki spoke up from the back of the room. And the personality changes, because Midoriya's been acting differently since USJ, more focused. More, he paused, searching for the right word. Controlled, that was perceptive. Trust Todoroki to notice the subtle shifts that others might miss. Izuku met his classmates' heterochromatic gaze and tried to project normalcy. Inherited memories can influence behavior, he said, sticking to the script they'd prepared. I'm still me, just more complete, I guess. Like I finally have access to parts of myself that were always there. So you're saying you've been holding back this whole time? Bakugo's voice cut across the room like a blade. He was slouched in his seat, arms crossed, but his red eyes were locked on Izuku with laser focus. All those times you acted helpless, all that crying and whining, that was just an act? No, Izuku said quickly. The memories only activated recently. Before USJ, I didn't have access to any of this. Bullshit. The word dropped into the classroom like a bomb. Aizawa started to step forward, but Bakugo was already on his feet, explosions crackling around his palms. You expect me to believe that you just magically became a master swordsman overnight, that all this, he gestured at Izuku with barely contained fury, just happened because of stress. Bakugo, sit down, Aizawa warned. No, Bakugo's voice was getting louder, more volatile. I've known this bastard since we were kids. I know every single thing about him, every weakness, every pathetic moment. And none of that, he pointed at the phone displaying frozen footage from the night before, is Deku. The room had gone completely silent. Even Principal Nezu seemed caught off guard by the raw emotion in Bakugo's voice. This wasn't just skepticism, it was betrayal, hurt wrapped in anger and expressed through destruction. So tell me, Bakugo continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Who the hell are you really? Izuku felt something cold settle in his chest. The easy lie wasn't going to work on Bakugo. His childhood friend knew him too well, had too much history to accept a simple explanation. Which meant this was about to get very complicated very quickly. I'm still Izuku Midoriya, he said, putting every ounce of sincerity he could muster into the words. These memories, they don't change who I am at my core. Don't they? Bakugo stepped closer, ignoring Aizawa's warning gestures. Because the Deku I know doesn't move like a killer. Doesn't analyze combat scenarios like he's planning an assassination. Doesn't look at people like he's cataloging their weak points. The accuracy of the observations hit Izuku like physical blows. Bakugo had been watching, analyzing, putting together pieces of a puzzle that Izuku hadn't realized he was revealing, and the picture those pieces painted. I'm not a killer, Izuku said quietly. No, Bakugo agreed. But whoever's memories you're carrying was. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Around the room, Izuku could see his classmates processing the implication, expressions shifting from concern to something approaching fear. "That's enough," Aizawa said sharply, his capture weapon partially deployed. "Bakugo, return to your seat. Midoriya, we've covered what we needed to cover." Class dismissed. But as his classmates filed out, Izuku caught the looks they were giving him. Cautious glances, whispered conversations, the subtle shift in body language that said everything he needed to know. They were afraid of him. Not all of them. Uraraka still managed a reassuring smile, and Ida nodded formally as he passed. But enough of them that the message was clear. Things had changed, probably permanently. The worst part was, Bakugo wasn't wrong. The memories he was carrying did belong to someone who'd been a killer. Someone who'd spent centuries perfecting the art of ending lives with surgical precision. And every day, those memories felt more natural, more like they belonged to him. Bakugo cornered him after dinner, in one of the empty hallways between the common areas and the dorm rooms. Izuku had been expecting it. His childhood friend had never been good at letting things go, especially when he felt like he'd been lied to. "We need to talk." Bakugo's voice was calmer than it had been in the classroom, but there was steel underneath the surface. "Just you and me, no teachers, no bullshit official explanations." Izuku glanced around the hallway, confirming they were alone. "What do you want to know?" "Everything, starting with when you first realized you were lying to me." The directness of the question caught Izuku off guard. He'd been prepared for anger, accusations, maybe even a fight. He hadn't been prepared for hurt. "I wasn't lying," he said carefully. "Not exactly, I just didn't know how to explain what was happening. So explain it now." Izuku took a deep breath, weighing his options. He could stick to the official story, try to convince Bakugo that inherited memories were explanation enough. But his childhood friend would see through that immediately. Bakugo knew him too well for comfortable lies. Or he could tell the truth, not all of it, but enough to satisfy Bakugo's need for honesty. It was dangerous, but maybe honesty was what their friendship needed right now. "The memories aren't just from a relative," he said finally. "They're from someone who lived hundreds of years ago, before quirks existed." Bakugo's eyes narrowed. "Reincarnation." "Yeah, and this person, what were they?" This was the critical moment. How much could he reveal without making things worse? A warrior, someone who fought to protect people, but who eventually lost sight of what he was protecting them from. Lost sight how? Izuku met Bakugo's gaze directly. He became the very thing he'd sworn to destroy. The hallway fell silent, except for the distant sounds of other students in the common areas. Bakugo studied Izuku's face like he was trying to read a foreign language. "So you're carrying the memories of someone who fell to the dark side," he said eventually. "Someone who betrayed everything they stood for." "Yes. And you think that doesn't change who you are?" "I'm trying not to let it." Bakugo was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. When he spoke again, his voice was softer but no less intense. "I've known you since we were kids, Deku. I've seen you at your worst, crying, helpless, getting beaten up by extras who weren't worth the dirt under your feet. And through all of that, you never stopped trying to help people, never stopped believing that heroes save everyone." He stepped closer, close enough that Izuku could see the genuine concern in his red eyes. "But that person from last night, the one who moved through those villains like they were training dummies, that person wasn't trying to save anyone, they were solving a problem. Efficiently. Permanently, I didn't kill them." "You could have," Bakugo interrupted. "I saw the footage. Every single strike was aimed at a disabled point, but they could just as easily have been kill shots. And part of you, the part that remembers being someone else, wanted to make that choice." The accuracy of the observation was terrifying. Bakugo had seen through to the heart of what was happening to him, the internal struggle that Izuku had been trying to hide from everyone, including himself. "You're right," he said quietly. "Part of me did want to kill them, and that scares the hell out of me." Bakugo nodded slowly. "Good. The day it stops scaring you is the day you become whoever that warrior turned into." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Bakugo spoke again. "I'm not going to pretend I understand what you're going through. Past lives, inherited memories, whatever the hell this is, it's way above my pay grade." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of something that might have been vulnerability. "But I know you, Deku, the real you, and if you ever feel like you're losing that person, if those memories start taking over," he trailed off, explosions popping in his palms. "You'll stop me?" Izuku asked. "I'll try." Bakugo's smile was sharp and dangerous and completely sincere. "That's what rivals are for, right? Keeping each other honest." For the first time since USJ, Izuku felt like he could breathe properly. Not everything had changed. Bakugo was still Bakugo, abrasive, competitive, but fundamentally loyal to the people he cared about. "Thank you," Izuku said. "Don't thank me yet." Bakugo turned to head back toward the common areas, then paused. "And Deku, next time you're dealing with something this big, tell me sooner. I can't watch your back if I don't know what I'm watching for." After he left, Izuku stood alone in the hallway, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The secret was out, at least partially. His classmates knew he was different now, carrying memories and abilities that didn't quite fit the person they thought they knew. But maybe that was okay. Maybe being different didn't have to mean being alone. Outside the windows, the moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the walls. For the first time since this all began, it didn't look like judgment. It looked like possibility. The video had been watched 47 million times in 18 hours. Tomura Shigaraki sat in the dimly lit bar that served as the League of Villains headquarters, scrolling through comment after comment of breathless speculation about the lunar hero. His fingers itched against his phone screen, the urge to decay something growing stronger with each replay of the footage. The mysterious quirk user moved like liquid death, carving through 3 hardened villains with surgical precision that made Shigaraki's teeth clench. This wasn't some lucky amateur stumbling into heroism. This was mastery, the kind that took decades to develop. Magnificent, isn't it? All for One's voice drifted from the speakers mounted around the room, that familiar tone of casual amusement that meant his sensei had found something particularly interesting. Shigaraki paused the video on a frame that showed the crescent blades mid-formation, silver light frozen against the night sky. "It's flashy," Shigaraki said, trying to keep the grudging respect out of his voice. "But flashy doesn't mean dangerous. The heroes have plenty of show-offs. Watch it again. Focus on the technique, not the spectacle." Shigaraki hit replay, this time paying attention to the details his sensei was highlighting. The way each crescent was aimed with mathematical precision. How the mysterious hero moved through the combat zone without wasting a single step. The complete absence of hesitation or uncertainty in every motion. He knew exactly where to strike, Shigaraki realized. Not just to disable, to neutralize permanently if he'd wanted to. Very good, and what does that suggest about his training? That he's been taught to kill. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Those aren't hero techniques, they're assassin techniques. Indeed, though I wonder. All for One's voice carried a note of something that might have been nostalgia. "Kurogiri, pull up the historical archives I showed you last month. The ones about pre-quirk combat arts." The misty villain materialized behind the bar, yellow eyes glowing with curiosity. "The breathing-based disciplines? Master, surely you don't think—" "I think," All for One interrupted, "that I haven't seen techniques like those in over 4 centuries. Not since a very specific family of warriors made themselves. Problematic for my early operations." Shigaraki leaned forward, interest peaked. His sensei rarely talked about the old days, the time before quirks when different kinds of power ruled the world. "You knew them, knew of them. The Tsujukuni bloodline produced warriors capable of extraordinary feats through disciplined breathing and blade work. Most died fighting my associates during the transition period. But some techniques, it seems, have a way of surviving." The video played again, and this time Shigaraki could see what All for One was getting at. The fluid movements, the impossible precision, the way the mysterious hero's breathing never seemed to falter even during intense combat. "So what do we do about it?" Shigaraki asked. "We test it, see if this new player is a threat worth eliminating or a resource worth acquiring." All for One's voice grew thoughtful. "Though I suspect, given the restraint shown in that footage, that acquisition may prove challenging. You want me to go after him? I want you to make him choose. Force a situation where his pretty morals conflict with tactical necessity. See which side of his heritage wins." Kurogiri cleared his throat, or made the sound that passed for clearing his throat. "Master, if these techniques truly derive from the old bloodlines, attempting to steal them might be inadvisable. The last time you tried to take abilities from that family. The circumstances were different then," All for One said sharply. "And I was less experienced in handling exotic quirks. This time I'll be prepared." Shigaraki grinned, the expression stretching his scarred features in ways that weren't entirely human. "When do we start?" "Soon. But first, I want more data. See if our lunar hero can be provoked into showing his true capabilities. Then we'll know what we're really dealing with." The conversation moved on to other targets, other plans, but Shigaraki's attention kept drifting back to the paused video. There was something about the way the hero moved that bothered him, a familiarity that he couldn't quite place. It reminded him of someone who'd never doubted their right to live. Someone who'd never questioned whether they deserved the power they carried. It reminded him of everything he'd once wanted to be before All for One had shown him a better way. UA. High school had seen its share of media circuses, but nothing quite like this. The front gates were packed 3 deep with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious student who'd become an overnight internet sensation. The school had been forced to bring in additional security just to keep the crowds from spilling onto the campus proper. Inside, the atmosphere was tense with barely controlled chaos. Izuku made his way through the halls toward his first class, trying to ignore the stares and whispered conversations that followed in his wake. Word had spread quickly through the school. Everyone knew he was the lunar hero now, and everyone had an opinion about what that meant. Most of the opinions weren't particularly charitable. Heard he's been hiding his real quirk this whole time. Doesn't make sense though. You can't just fake being quirkless for that long. My cousin in the support course says the analysis department is calling his techniques potentially lethal. Izuku ducked his head and walked faster, but the conversation seemed to follow him anyway. By the time he reached Class 1A's door, he felt like he'd been put through a blender made of unwanted attention. The classroom itself was only marginally better. His classmates had mostly accepted the official explanation about ancestral memories, but there was still an undercurrent of unease that hadn't been there before. People were polite, friendly even, but they kept their distance in a way that made his chest tight. "Rough morning?" Uraraka asked as he slumped into his seat. She was one of the few who seemed genuinely unaffected by the revelations, though he could see concern in her expression. "Media circus," Izuku muttered. "I can't even get to class without someone shoving a microphone in my face." "It'll die down," she said confidently. "These things always do. Give it a week and they'll be chasing some other story." Izuku hoped she was right, but something told him this wasn't going to be that simple. The footage had been too dramatic, too mysterious. The internet loved a good puzzle, and he just handed them one of the most compelling mysteries in recent hero history. Aizawa entered the room with his usual dramatic flair, capture weapon trailing behind him like a fabric storm cloud. But instead of starting class immediately, he moved to the front of the room and fixed the students with his most intimidating stare. "I'm going to say this once, so pay attention," he began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even Bakugo sit up straighter. "The media attention surrounding recent events is not an excuse for poor performance, distraction, or gossip. Anyone caught discussing classified information about their classmates with outside parties will be expelled immediately." His gaze swept across the room, lingering on several students who'd been particularly chatty in the hallways. Furthermore, any student who feels they can't trust their classmates is welcome to request a transfer to a different program. This class operates on mutual respect and support. If you can't provide that, you don't belong here. The message was clear: get over it or get out. Izuku felt a rush of gratitude toward his homeroom teacher, even as he noticed that not everyone looked entirely convinced by the ultimatum. Class proceeded normally after that, though Izuku caught several sideways glances throughout the morning. During lunch, he found himself sitting with his usual group, Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki, but the conversation felt stilted in a way it never had before. "The media attention must be difficult," Ida said eventually, his formal tone suggesting he was trying to address the elephant in the room diplomatically. "It's not great," Izuku admitted. "I never wanted this kind of spotlight. Fame is a burden that comes with exceptional ability," Todoroki observed quietly. "The key is not letting it change who you are at your core." There was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with unwanted attention. Izuku remembered the speculation that had surrounded Todoroki's family, the way the media had dissected his relationship with Endeavor after the sports festival. "How do you handle it?" Izuku asked. "I remember that other people's opinions don't define my worth," Todoroki replied, "and I focus on the people whose opinions actually matter." It was good advice, even if it was easier said than done. Izuku was starting to understand why so many heroes struggled with the public aspects of their careers. The constant scrutiny, the way every action got analyzed and reanalyzed until it barely resembled what actually happened, it was exhausting. The afternoon brought combat training, which meant facing his classmates in a context where his new abilities would be impossible to hide. Aizawa had clearly briefed the other faculty members, because All Might's exercises were designed to minimize direct confrontation while still testing everyone's skills. But even in team scenarios, Izuku could feel the difference in how his classmates approached working with him. They were more cautious, more deferential, like they weren't quite sure what he was capable of anymore. The worst part was they were right to be cautious. Even holding back as much as he dared, his enhanced awareness and combat instincts made him dramatically more effective than he'd been just a week ago. He could predict his teammates' movements, anticipate enemy tactics, identify optimal strategies with a clarity that felt almost unfair. "This is what real power feels like," whispered the voice in his head. "Not the desperate flailing you used to call heroism, actual competence." After training, All Might pulled him aside for what had become a daily check-in. These conversations were supposedly about monitoring his psychological state and ability development, but Izuku suspected they were really about All Might trying to decide whether he was still worthy of One for All. "How are you feeling about the increased attention?" All Might asked as they walked toward his private office. "Like I'm living in a fishbowl," Izuku said honestly. "Every move I make gets scrutinized, analyzed, posted online. It's a lot." "Fame is one of the more challenging aspects of hero work," All Might agreed. "Especially when it comes unexpectedly. Are you finding it difficult to maintain focus on your training?" "The training is fine. It's everything else that's complicated." They reached the office, and All Might gestured for Izuku to take his usual seat across from the desk. But instead of sitting down himself, the older hero remained standing, hands clasped behind his back in a pose that suggested serious conversation incoming. "Young Midoriya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering." Izuku's stomach clenched. "Okay, do you believe you're ready to inherit One for All?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected, he'd been dreading it for days, but because he didn't have a good answer. A week ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. He'd proven himself at the sports festival, during the internships, in countless training exercises. He demonstrated both the will and the character necessary to carry on All Might's legacy. But that was before the memories. Before he'd started moving through combat scenarios like he was solving math problems instead of saving lives. Before he'd discovered that part of him enjoyed the precision, the efficiency, the simple clarity of permanent solutions. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I want to be ready. I want to live up to everything you've taught me about being a hero. But these memories, the way they're changing how I think about things," he trailed off, struggling for words. "What specifically concerns you?" "The voice," Izuku said, then immediately regretted the admission. All Might's expression sharpened. "Voice," there was no taking it back now. Not auditory hallucinations or anything like that, just thoughts that feel like mine but carry emotional weight I didn't earn. Impulses that don't align with my values. A perspective on conflict resolution, that's more. He searched for a diplomatic way to phrase it. "Permanent than what I'm comfortable with." All Might was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "And you feel these thoughts are becoming stronger?" "Yeah. Especially during combat situations. It's like there's part of me that remembers being someone who didn't have the luxury of non-lethal solutions. Someone who killed." "Yeah." All Might moved to the window, looking out over the campus with an expression that Izuku couldn't read. One for All has been passed down through 8 generations of heroes. Each user has faced moments where killing might have been the easier path, the more efficient solution. What separated them from villains wasn't the absence of that temptation, it was the choice to reject it, even when it cost them. He turned back to face Izuku directly. "The question isn't whether you're capable of killing. The question is whether you're capable of choosing not to, even when everything in you says it's the smart play. And if I'm not sure I can make that choice, then you're not ready for One for All." All Might's voice was gentle but implacable. "I won't pass the ultimate symbol of heroic power to someone who might use it to take lives, no matter how justified it might seem in the moment." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Izuku had known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it for days, but hearing the rejection spoken aloud still felt like having something vital torn out of his chest. "I understand," he managed. "This isn't permanent," All Might said quickly. "You're still young, still developing. These memories, this internal conflict, they don't define who you'll become, they're just obstacles you need to overcome. And if I can't overcome them," All Might's smile was sad but genuine, "then you'll find another way to be a hero. One for All isn't the only path to making a difference in the world." After All Might dismissed him, Izuku walked back toward the dorms in a daze. The day that had started badly had somehow gotten progressively worse, culminating in the effective suspension of everything he'd been working toward for the past year. He was so lost in his own thoughts that he almost missed the figure waiting for him in the shadows between buildings. Almost, the enhanced perception kicked in automatically. highlighting the person's position, posture, and potential threat level before his conscious mind had even registered their presence. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, lean build suggesting speed over strength, hands positioned for quick access to weapons. Dangerous, but not immediately hostile. Izuku Midoriya, the figure said, stepping into the light. Izuku's breath caught. He'd seen this man before in news footage and wanted posters. The distinctive costume, the bandages wrapped around his face, the collection of blades that marked him as one of Japan's most wanted villains. Stain. The hero killer? You're smaller than I expected, Stain continued, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that had become infamous across the country. But then, true strength rarely announces itself with size. What do you want? Izuku asked, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. His hand was already moving toward his phone, ready to call for backup, but Stain made no aggressive moves. To see if the footage was accurate, Stain replied. To determine whether you represent genuine heroic virtue or another false idol propped up by society's corruption. And, Stain studied him for a long moment, those intense eyes seeming to look straight through him. You move with the discipline of someone who understands the weight of taking a life. Your techniques carry the precision of a true warrior, not the flashy incompetence of modern heroes. He stepped closer, and Izuku had to resist the urge to shift into a combat stance. But more importantly, you chose restraint when killing would have been simpler. That suggests a purity of purpose that's become vanishingly rare. I'm not sure what you're getting at. I'm saying that you carry the techniques of the old ways, but your heart remains uncorrupted. Stain's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Don't let them change that. Don't let Hero Society's political games and public relations concerns dull the edge of what you could become. Before Izuku could respond, Stain melted back into the shadows with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years avoiding capture. Within seconds, he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of metal and old blood. Izuku stood alone in the gathering darkness, mind reeling from the encounter. The hero killer had sought him out specifically, had analyzed his techniques and found them. Worthy, the approval should have been disturbing, but part of him, the part that remembered being someone else, found it oddly satisfying. He recognizes quality when he sees it, whispered the voice in his head. Unlike the pretenders who call themselves heroes. Izuku shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. Stain was a killer, a terrorist who'd murdered dozens of licensed heroes. His approval wasn't something to be proud of. But as he made his way back to the dorms, he couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter had been significant in ways he didn't fully understand yet. His phone buzzed as he reached the entrance. A text from an unknown number. The moon shines bright tonight, little reincarnation, sweet dreams. T.S. Izuku stared at the message, blood running cold. Tomura Shigaraki. The League of Villains had been watching him, analyzing him, and now they were making contact. He was officially on their radar. As he deleted the message and headed inside, Izuku caught sight of his reflection in the glass doors. For just a moment, the face looking back seemed older, sharper, carrying memories of battles fought under moonlight against enemies that wore human faces. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Bakugo was waiting for him. Izuku barely made it through the dorm entrance before his childhood friend materialized from the shadows near the stairwell, red eyes blazing with an intensity that could have melted steel. There was no preamble, no casual greeting, just Bakugo grabbing him by the front of his shirt and hauling him toward an empty common room. We need to talk. Now, Kachan, what? Shut up and move. Bakugo's voice was tight with barely controlled fury, but underneath it, Izuku could hear something else. Fear. Someone's been watching the dorms for the past hour. Professional surveillance, not media vultures. They left right after you got back. Izuku's blood ran cold. The text message from Shigaraki suddenly felt less like posturing and more like a genuine threat. How do you know they were watching me specifically? Because they had high-powered cameras pointed at the entrance, and they packed up the second you walked through the door. Bakugo kicked the common room door shut behind them, then activated his quirk just enough to generate a privacy screen of crackling explosions. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and you're going to give me a real answer. What the hell is going on? Izuku looked at his friend, really looked at him. Bakugo's usual aggressive posture was still there, but his hands were shaking slightly. The kind of barely visible tremor that came from adrenaline and genuine concern. Show me your phone, Bakugo said suddenly. What? Your phone, now. Izuku hesitated, then pulled out his device. Bakugo snatched it away, fingers flying over the screen with surprising technical competence. After a moment, he held up the message thread that Izuku thought he'd deleted. The moon shines bright tonight, little reincarnation. Bakugo read aloud. Sweet dreams. TS want to explain why Tomura Shigaraki has your personal number. The bottom dropped out of Izuku's stomach. How did you? Phone recovery app. I put it on your device months ago after you kept losing it during training. Bakugo's expression was grim. Good thing too, since apparently villains are texting you death threats and you thought deleting them was sufficient security. Izuku sat down heavily on one of the couches, the weight of everything finally catching up with him. First the encounter with Stain, then the text from Shigaraki, now the surveillance. The walls were closing in from every direction. If villains are targeting you, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, then I need the real truth. Not the sanitized version you gave the faculty, not the bullshit story about ancestral memories, everything. You won't believe me. Try me. Izuku looked up at his childhood friend, seeing past the aggressive exterior to the genuine concern underneath. Bakugo had always been direct, sometimes brutally so, but he'd never been dishonest about the things that mattered. The memories aren't from a relative, Izuku said quietly. They're from someone who lived 400 years ago. Someone named Tsujukuni Michikatsu. Bakugo's expression didn't change. Keep going. He was a demon slayer initially, one of the strongest of his generation. But he became consumed with jealousy over his younger brother, who was more naturally talented. That jealousy, Izuku swallowed hard, it drove him to make a deal with the very demons he'd been hunting. He became one of them. Spent centuries killing the people he'd once protected. The silence that followed was profound. Bakugo stared at him for a long moment, processing the implications. So you're telling me you've got the memories of a centuries-old monster living in your head, he said finally. Yeah, and those memories come with combat techniques that could probably kill most of our class without breaking a sweat. Yeah, and you've been trying to handle this alone because I was terrified, Izuku said, the admission ripping out of him like a physical wound. Because every day the voice in my head gets a little stronger, a little more convincing. Because sometimes when I look at people, I automatically catalog the most efficient ways to kill them. Because I'm scared that if I give in to those instincts even once, I'll become exactly what he was. Bakugo was quiet for a moment, then let out a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so sharp around the edges. You think I'd judge you for someone else's sins, you idiot? The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. What? You heard me. Bakugo leaned forward, his expression intense but no longer angry. You think I don't know what it's like to have something dark living in your head? You think I haven't spent years fighting against the part of me that wants to prove I'm better than everyone else, no matter what it costs? Izuku stared at him, seeing his childhood friend with new clarity. The aggressive competitiveness, the need to be the best, the anger that seemed to drive everything he did. It wasn't that different from what Kokushibo had felt toward Yoriichi. I was your Kokushibo, Bakugo continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Jealous, angry, always chasing after someone who made everything look effortless. The only difference is I figured out how to deal with it before it destroyed me. How? By admitting I needed help, by letting other people see the ugly parts and trusting them not to run away. Bakugo's smile was sharp but genuine. You think you're a monster because you've got a killer's memories. Fine, but you're not alone in this anymore. The training ground they'd commandeered was one of the smaller facilities, designed for individual practice rather than class exercises. It was past curfew technically, but Bakugo had sweet-talked their way past the security systems with a combination of student council connections and selective rule interpretation. All right, Bakugo said as they faced each other across the practice space. Show me what you've really been holding back. Izuku hesitated. Kachan, these techniques are dangerous. Yeah, I got that part. Good thing I'm not made of tissue paper. Explosions crackled around Bakugo's palms. Stop fighting like you're afraid of yourself and show me what all the fuss is about. The breathing pattern came naturally now, 30 seconds of controlled rhythm that shifted his perception into that crystalline clarity. The world sharpened, colors bleeding away to leave everything in shades of silver and black. Through the transparent world, he could see Bakugo's circulatory system, the rapid heartbeat that spoke of excitement rather than fear. Seventh form. Mirror of misfortune, moonlit. The technique flowed out of him like water, his body moving through patterns that felt more natural than walking. Multiple crescents traced complex paths through the air, each one aimed not to harm but to test, to push Bakugo's defenses without crossing the line into genuine danger. Bakugo met the attack with an explosion-boosted leap that carried him above the initial wave of crescents, then used controlled blasts to redirect himself midair. His counterattack came in the form of precisely aimed explosions that forced Izuku to flow into the 8th form without conscious thought. 8th form, Moon Dragon Ringtail. This one was bigger, more complex, requiring perfect breath control to maintain coherency. A massive crescent that split into smaller ones, creating a spiral pattern that covered nearly the entire training space. But instead of unleashing it at full power, Izuku held back, using just enough force to make his point without actually endangering his friend. The spar continued for 20 minutes, both of them pushing harder than they had since their early days at UA. But something was different now. Where their previous fights had been driven by competition and barely controlled aggression, this felt more like a conversation conducted in explosions and silver light. Bakugo was testing him, pushing him to show the full extent of his abilities. And Izuku was responding, letting more of himself show than he had since the memories first awakened. When they finally called a halt, both were breathing heavily but grinning. "That," Bakugo said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "was more like it. You actually looked like you were enjoying yourself instead of apologizing for every move." Izuku considered that. It was true for the first time since USJ he'd felt comfortable using the inherited techniques. Not guilty, not afraid, just competent. It felt good, he admitted. To not have to hold back so much. Then stop holding back. Bakugo's expression grew serious. "I get why you're scared of these memories, why you think they're going to turn you into something you're not. But hiding from them isn't going to make them go away. What if you're wrong? What if giving in to them changes me? Then I'll kick your ass back to sanity." Bakugo's grin was sharp and dangerous and completely sincere. That's what partners are for. The library research sessions started as an accident and turned into a revelation. They'd been looking for historical information about pre-quirk combat techniques, trying to find any records that might explain where Kokushibo's abilities had come from. What they found instead was a digitized collection of Taishuira documents that contained far more detail than either of them had expected. "Holy shit," Bakugo muttered, scrolling through a particularly detailed account. "Listen to this. Tsujukuni Yoriichi was considered the strongest demon slayer of his generation, capable of techniques that bordered on the supernatural. His older brother, Michikatsu, was also highly skilled but lived perpetually in his sibling's shadow." Izuku leaned over to read the screen, his stomach clenching as more details emerged. The historical account painted a picture that was painfully familiar: two brothers, one naturally gifted, the other working twice as hard for half the recognition. Despite Michikatsu's dedication and technical mastery, Bakugo continued, he could never match his younger brother's seemingly effortless perfection. This disparity eventually drove him to make choices that cost both brothers everything they held dear. "Yoriichi," Izuku said quietly, "that was his name, the brother he envied." Bakugo looked up from the screen, his expression thoughtful. "And you're getting flashes of that jealousy, the resentment towards someone who made it all look easy. Every day, sometimes it's so strong I can barely think past it." "Huh." Bakugo sat back in his chair, apparently processing something. "You know what's funny? Reading this, it sounds exactly like us. Before UA, I mean, you following me around, desperate to prove yourself, while I acted like everything came naturally." Izuku stared at him. "Kachan, I was a bastard to you for years," Bakugo said matter-of-factly. "Told you that you were worthless, that you'd never amount to anything, that you should just give up on your dreams. And you know what? Part of me believed it. Part of me thought that if I could convince you that you were nothing, it would prove that I was something." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unresolved history. "But here's the thing," Bakugo continued. "You never gave up, you never let my bullshit break you, and when you finally got a quirk, when you started proving that you could be a hero, I had to face the fact that maybe I'd been wrong about everything." "What does that have to do with Michikatsu?" "Everything." Bakugo leaned forward, his expression intense. He looked at his brother and saw someone who had what he wanted, someone who made his efforts feel worthless. So he made a deal with demons to get power he hadn't earned. And it destroyed both of them. Izuku could see where this was going, but he needed to hear Bakugo say it. "I looked at you and felt the same jealousy, the same resentment. But instead of making a deal with demons, Bakugo paused, struggling with words. "I made a deal with myself, to be better, to earn the recognition I thought I deserved instead of trying to tear you down to get it. And that made the difference. That made all the difference." Bakugo's smile was surprisingly gentle. "The jealousy doesn't just go away, it's still there, probably always will be. But now I use it as fuel instead of letting it use me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the implications. Finally, Izuku spoke up. All Might suspended the one-for-all transfer, he said quietly. He's worried that these memories will make me too willing to kill. Bakugo's expression darkened. And you're just accepting that? What choice do I have? He's right to be concerned. These instincts, the way they make me think about solving problems, are tools, Bakugo interrupted. Dangerous tools, yeah, but tools all the same. The question isn't whether you have them, it's whether you can control them. And if I can't, then we'll figure it out together. Bakugo stood up, already moving toward the library exit. Come on, we're going to talk to All Might. Now, it's past midnight. Now, because you've been carrying this alone for too long and it's making you stupid. Bakugo's grin was sharp and determined. Besides, isn't it about time the symbol of peace met the real Izuku Midoriya, demon memories and all? As they made their way through the empty halls toward All Might's office, Izuku felt something he hadn't experienced since the memories first awakened. Hope, not the desperate, clinging variety that came with denial, but the solid, grounded kind that came with having people who understood the darkness and chose to stand with you anyway. Behind them, the moon hung low on the horizon, casting silver light through the windows. For the first time in weeks, it didn't look like judgment, it looked like possibility. All Might looked terrible. That was Izuku's first thought when his mentor opened the office door at nearly 1 in the morning, steam still rising from his skeletal form as he shifted out of his muscle form. The symbol of peace had clearly been working late, again, and the strain was written across every line of his gaunt face. Young Midoriya, young Bakugo, All Might blinked in confusion, taking in their disheveled appearance and the determined expressions they wore. What are you doing here at this hour? If this is about tomorrow's training schedule, it's about the one-for-all situation, Bakugo interrupted, shouldering past All Might into the office. And why you're making a mistake? All Might's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. I see, and you feel qualified to make that assessment because I know Deku better than anyone else alive, Bakugo said bluntly, settling into one of the office chairs without invitation. And because I've spent the last few hours watching him hold back enough power to level a city block because he's terrified of becoming something he's not. Izuku followed them into the office, closing the door behind him. Kacchan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Bakugo fixed All Might with a stare that could have cut glass. He told me everything, the real story, not the sanitized version you got. Reincarnation, demon memories, the whole mess. And you know what I realized? All Might sat down slowly, his attention focused entirely on Bakugo now. What? You're judging him for having dark thoughts instead of asking whether he acts on them. Bakugo leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of his body. Yeah, he's got the memories of someone who became a monster. Yeah, those memories come with instincts that don't exactly scream hero. But when has Deku ever let his worst impulses control him? This is different, All Might began. Is it? Bakugo's voice rose slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like every other time Deku's had to fight against something inside him. He's always been his own worst enemy, always been more afraid of hurting people than getting hurt himself. The only thing that's changed is the scale of what he could do if he lost control. Izuku watched the exchange with growing amazement. He'd never seen Bakugo defend anyone this passionately, let alone him. But there was something else, a familiarity in the way his childhood friend was arguing like they'd had this conversation before. You've dealt with something similar, All Might said, apparently reaching the same conclusion. The anger issues you've been working through since your first year. Bakugo's laugh was sharp but not entirely bitter. Anger issues, that's one way to put it. More accurate would be saying I spent years convinced that I was inherently better than everyone else, that anyone who challenged that belief deserved to be crushed. He gestured at Izuku without looking away from All Might. I bullied him for over a decade because his existence made me question whether I was as special as I thought I was. And you know what changed? What? I admitted it. Stopped pretending the problem was everyone else and started looking at myself. Bakugo's expression grew serious. Deku's doing the same thing now. He's looking at these memories, these instincts, and instead of embracing them or denying them, he's trying to understand them. That's not the behavior of someone who's going to lose control. All Might was quiet for a long moment, studying both of them with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been hope. The techniques he displayed tonight, he said finally. The level of restraint required to use abilities that lethal in a non-lethal manner, it's extraordinary. But what happens when that restraint fails? What happens when he's pushed past his breaking point? Then he'll have one for all to help him stay grounded, Bakugo said immediately. Instead of making him choose between power and support, give him both. Let him know that you trust him to make the right choice when it matters. Izuku found his voice. I'm scared of what I could become, he said quietly, but I'm more scared of not being strong enough to protect the people I care about. These memories, they don't make me want to hurt innocent people. They make me want to be strong enough to stop the people who do. All Might leaned back in his chair, the weight of decision visible in every line of his body. The previous users of One for All, they all faced moments where killing would have been easier, but they chose differently. They chose to be symbols of hope rather than fear. And you think I can't make that choice? I think, All Might paused, choosing his words carefully. I think you're young, dealing with extraordinary circumstances, and carrying a burden that no one should have to bear alone. But watching you tonight, seeing how you fought against every instinct to showcase your abilities until you had no choice. He smiled, and for the first time in days, it reached his eyes. You reminded me why I chose you in the first place. The silence that followed felt different from the tense conversations they'd been having all week, lighter somehow, like a pressure valve had been released. So, Bakugo said eventually, are we doing this or not? All Might looked at Izuku directly. Are you ready for One for All? Not the power, I know you can handle that, but the responsibility that comes with it. The knowledge that you'll be carrying the hopes of 8 previous users, all of whom trusted their successors to be better than they were. Izuku thought about Kokushibo, about the jealousy and pride that had driven him to betray everything he'd once stood for. Then he thought about Yoriichi, the brother who'd carried unimaginable power with perfect humility until the day he died. I'm ready to try, he said, and if I start to fall short of what they represented, I trust you to stop me. We'll stop you, Bakugo corrected. All of us, that's what teams are for. All Might nodded slowly, then stood and moved to a small safe built into the wall behind his desk. Very well, but we're doing this properly, with witnesses and safeguards and a very long conversation about what One for All really means. He turned back to face them, his expression grave but determined. Because after tonight, there's no going back. The power, the responsibility, the target it puts on your back, all of it becomes permanent. Before anyone could respond, every phone in the room started buzzing simultaneously. Emergency alerts, incoming calls, the distinctive sound of a city in crisis. All Might answered his phone on the second ring. This is All Might. Izuku could hear the tinny voice of a dispatcher through the speaker, words tumbling over each other in urgent succession. Multiple locations under attack, Namu-class entities, area-wide destruction, all available heroes respond immediately. All Might's expression hardened. How many locations? 7 confirmed, more reports coming in. They're hitting residential and commercial districts simultaneously. Estimated civilian casualties. We're on our way. All Might ended the call and turned to face them, his body already beginning to steam as he prepared to shift forms. This conversation will have to wait. The city needs all available heroes, Izuku interrupted, standing up, including the ones still in training. Absolutely not. This is clearly a coordinated attack, which means they're trying to spread you thin, Bakugo finished. Make you choose between multiple crisis points so you can't be everywhere at once. All Might paused, the transformation half complete. Even if that's true, sending students into a situation this dangerous isn't your call anymore, a new voice said from the doorway. They turned to see Principal Nezu entering the office, followed by Aizawa and several other faculty members. The small creature's usual cheerful demeanor was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the cold calculation of someone making difficult decisions under pressure. The attacks are too widespread for our current hero deployment, Nezu continued. We need every capable fighter we can get, which includes our advanced students, under faculty supervision, of course. Aizawa stepped forward, his capture weapon already partially deployed. Midoriya, Bakugo, you're with me. Downtown District, 3 confirmed Nomus with enhancement modifications. Enhanced how? All Might asked. Regeneration, multiple quirks, and coordination that suggests central control. Aizawa's expression was grim. Someone's learned from previous Namu encounters and adapted accordingly. As they moved toward the door, All Might caught Izuku's arm. The One for All discussion can wait until after we save the city, Izuku said firmly. But the offer stands. When this is over, I'm ready. All Might squeezed his shoulder. Then try not to die before I can make it official. The downtown district looked like a war zone. Izuku stood on a rooftop 3 blocks from the main battle, using his enhanced perception to assess the situation, while Aizawa coordinated with other hero units via radio. Below them, 3 massive Nomus moved through the streets with terrifying efficiency. their enhanced abilities allowing them to tear through both infrastructure and the heroes trying to stop them. Analysis, Aizawa said curtly, not taking his eyes off the tactical display on his phone. Izuku activated the transparent world, letting the 30-second breathing sequence carry him into that state of crystalline awareness. The battlefield opened up like a book, revealing details that would have been impossible to see with normal senses. 3 distinct Namu variants, he reported. First one has enhanced regeneration and what looks like a strength multiplication quirk. Second has some kind of energy projection ability and enhanced speed. Third one, he paused, studying the creature's internal structure. Third one is the coordinator. It's got neural modifications that let it direct the other two. Weaknesses, the regeneration has limits, it's drawing from stored biological mass. The energy projector has a cooldown period between major attacks. And the coordinator, Izuku smiled grimly. The coordinator is maintaining constant communication with something off-site. Disrupt that connection and the other two lose their tactical advantage. Bakugo grinned. So we take out the brain first, then mop up the muscle. I like it. It's not going to be that simple, Aizawa warned. These Nomus are learning from each engagement. Every hero team that's engaged them has been forced to retreat after their tactics were countered. Izuku watched the creatures move through the streets below, noting the way they adapted their formations based on the heroes' responses. It was like watching a chess match played with living pieces, each move calculated to achieve maximum devastation. They're hurting, he realized suddenly. What? The attack pattern, it's not random. They're driving civilians and heroes toward specific locations. Izuku pointed to the evacuation routes the creatures had left open. This whole thing is a trap. Before anyone could respond, the third Namu looked up directly at their position. Its eyes locked onto Izuku with an intelligence that was definitely not standard for the creatures, and its mouth opened in what might have been a smile. Then it launched itself toward their building with enough force to crater the street below. Move, Aizawa barked, already swinging his capture weapon toward the next rooftop. But Izuku was done running, done hiding, done letting fear of what he might become prevent him from doing what needed to be done right now. The breathing pattern shifted automatically, pulling him into that perfect state of focus where the world slowed to match his perception. Around him, he could feel Aizawa and Bakugo moving, hear their shouts of warning or encouragement, but none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was stopping the creature before it could hurt anyone else. Ninth form, Moon Dragon Ringtail. The technique exploded out of him with more power than he'd ever channeled before, a massive crescent that split into smaller ones as it traveled, creating a spiral pattern that covered half the city block. But instead of dissipating after impact, the crescents held their form, weaving through the air with impossible precision. The lead Namu met the attack head-on and simply stopped. Not destroyed, not overwhelmed, but surgically disabled in a dozen different places simultaneously. Its coordination quirk severed, its enhanced muscles paralyzed, its regeneration systems disrupted at the cellular level. The other two Nomus, suddenly without central control, faltered in their attacks. The heroes who'd been pinned down by their coordinated assault seized the opportunity, and within minutes both creatures were neutralized. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. Izuku landed on the damaged rooftop, breathing hard but still standing. Around him, the city had gone quiet except for the distant sounds of emergency responders and the whispered conversations of civilians who'd witnessed the entire thing through their phone cameras. Holy shit, Bakugo said quietly, staring at the destruction pattern left by the crescents. That was incredible, Aizawa finished, though his expression was more concerned than impressed, and completely visible to every camera in a 6-block radius. Izuku looked around and realized his teacher was right. Every nearby building had windows filled with faces and phones, all of them pointed in his direction. The attack he just used, the one that had ended a crisis that had been overwhelming professional heroes, had been broadcast live to half the city. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number, but when he answered it, the voice on the other end was unfortunately familiar. Magnificent work, young man. All for one's cultured tone carried easily through the speaker, loud enough for the others to hear. Though I suspect you've just made yourself a very attractive target. What do you want? Izuku asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew. To make you an offer. Your power is wasted on Hero Society's limitations. Work with me and I can show you what those techniques were really meant for. Hard pass, All for One chuckled. I thought you might say that, no matter. I'm patient, and you'll discover soon enough that heroes have a way of disappointing the people who believe in them most. The line went dead, leaving them standing on a damaged rooftop in the middle of a city that had just watched a 17-year-old student do what multiple professional heroes couldn't. We need to get you back to campus, Aizawa said. Now, before every media outlet in the country decides they need an exclusive interview. But as they made their way through the city streets, Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. The footage was probably online by now, being analyzed by every hero agency, villain organization, and government watchdog in the country. He just painted a target on his back that was visible from orbit. And somehow, the voice in his head that sounded like Kokushibo was pleased about it. Finally, it whispered. Now they know what real power looks like. The hair felt heavier than it should have. Izuku stared at the single golden strand resting in All Might's palm, knowing that this moment would divide his life into before and after. Around him, the private training facility felt almost sacred in its silence. Just him, All Might, and Bakugo as witness to what was about to happen. I was wrong to doubt you, All Might said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine regret. Last night proved that you understand the difference between having power and choosing how to use it. Last night was you facing a crisis that had overwhelmed multiple professional heroes, analyzing it in seconds, and ending it with surgical precision while ensuring zero civilian casualties. All Might's smile was proud but serious. That's exactly the kind of judgment One for All requires. Bakugo shifted beside them, arms crossed but expression uncharacteristically solemn. He'd insisted on being here, claiming that someone needed to make sure you idiots don't screw this up. But Izuku could see the genuine concern in his friend's eyes. Are you sure about this? Izuku asked, though he already knew the answer. The AFO connection, the way these memories are affecting me, is exactly why you need One for All. All Might's tone grew firm. All for One made contact with you directly last night. He's identified you as a threat worth acquiring or eliminating. Without additional protection, you're vulnerable to quirk theft in ways that most heroes never have to worry about. That was the strategic reasoning. But there was something else in All Might's expression, something that went deeper than tactical considerations. You've proven you can handle the burden, All Might continued. Not just the power, but the responsibility that comes with it. The 8 previous users of One for All, they'd be proud to call you their successor. Izuku took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on his shoulders. 8 heroes who'd carried this power before him, each one trusting their successor to be worthy of the legacy. What do I need to do? Eat this. All Might held out the hair with a gentle smile. And try not to think too hard about how strange that sounds. The power hit him like lightning made of sunlight. One moment Izuku was swallowing the most unappetizing snack in human history. The next, he was drowning in energy that felt like it was trying to remake him from the inside out. His breathing pattern, so carefully maintained for weeks now, stuttered and nearly broke as raw power flooded through every cell in his body. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting against the new energy, his enhanced breathing began to channel it. The 30-second sequence that activated the transparent world shifted automatically, incorporating One for All's flow into the rhythm he'd learned from Kokushibo's memories. The 2 power sources began to resonate with each other, creating harmonics that neither could achieve alone. How do you feel? All Might asked, though his expression suggested he could already see the difference. Izuku looked down at his hands, watching small arcs of green energy dance between his fingers while silver light flickered at the edges of his vision. The combination was intoxicating. One for All's raw power refined through breathing techniques that turned brute force into surgical precision. Different, he said finally, like everything I could do before just became more. Try a basic technique, Bakugo suggested from his position near the observation window. Something simple so we can see how they interact. Izuku nodded, settling into the stance for the first form. The breathing came naturally now, but with One for All flowing through the pattern, everything felt amplified. He kept the power output low, maybe 5%, and began the sequence. First form, Dark Moon, Evening Palace. The crescent that emerged was unlike anything he'd produced before. Instead of the usual silver light, it glowed with a mixture of green and white energy that seemed to bend space around it as it traveled. When it struck the reinforced training dummy across the room, it didn't just cut. It erased a perfect arc from the target's surface, leaving edges so clean they looked polished. Holy shit, Bakugo breathed. Language, All Might said automatically, but his voice carried the same awe. The precision, the power output, it's like your techniques were designed to channel One for All. Izuku stared at the bisected training dummy, mind reeling from the implications. What happens if I use a higher percentage? Let's find out, All Might said, then quickly added, but carefully, start with 10% and work your way up slowly. The next attempt required more concentration. 10% of One for All was enough power to shatter concrete with his bare hands, but channeled through the breathing techniques, it became something far more refined. The third form produced multiple crescents that moved with impossible precision, each one capable of cutting through steel while somehow remaining perfectly controlled. 15%, All Might called out. This time, Izuku felt the strain. Maintaining the breathing pattern while channeling that much raw power required absolute focus. But the results were spectacular. The fifth form created crescents large enough to span the entire training facility, yet so precise they could have threaded a needle. 20%. The breathing pattern almost broke. For a moment, Izuku felt One for All threatening to overwhelm the careful rhythm he'd learned, turning surgical strikes into devastating explosions. But then the memory of Kokushibo's discipline kicked in, centuries of perfect breath control asserting itself over the chaos of unlimited power. Seventh form, Mirror of Misfortune, Moonlit. The result was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Multiple crescents traced impossibly complex patterns through the air, each one precisely calibrated to strike different points simultaneously. The training dummy didn't just break, it came apart in a dozen perfectly separated pieces, each cut so clean it looked like it had been made by a laser. Okay, All Might said, and there was something like nervousness in his voice. That's probably enough testing for now. Izuku powered down slowly, letting the breathing pattern return to its normal rhythm. The absence of One for All's energy left him feeling strangely hollow, like he'd been unplugged from a source of limitless potential. The combination works, he said, though that was obviously an understatement. Better than I expected. Too well, maybe, Bakugo said, moving closer to examine the remains of the training dummy. You realize you just demonstrated enough firepower to level half of Musutafu, right? The observation sobered all of them. Izuku had always known that One for All was incredibly powerful, but combined with techniques designed for precision rather than destruction, it became something entirely new. Something that could reshape battles, end conflicts, or, if used incorrectly, cause unimaginable devastation. We need to establish limits, All Might said firmly. Protocols for when and how you use the combined abilities. Because what I just saw, he shook his head. That kind of power needs safeguards. The cafeteria fell silent when he walked in. Izuku had expected some reaction. Word of his performance the night before had spread through UA like wildfire, and everyone knew something significant had changed. But the complete cessation of conversation, the way every head turned to track his movement, felt like being examined under a microscope. He grabbed his lunch tray and looked around for his usual table, only to find Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki all staring at him with expressions that mixed concern with something approaching wariness. Is this seat taken? He asked, trying to project normalcy. Of course not, Uraraka said quickly, though her smile seemed forced. How are you feeling? After last night, that looked intense. I'm fine, Izuku replied, settling into his chair. But even as he said it, he could feel the weight of everyone's attention pressing down on him. Conversations had resumed around the cafeteria, but they were quieter now, more subdued. The footage has been analyzed by every major hero agency, Ida said, his formal tone suggesting he was trying to process something he didn't fully understand. The precision of your techniques, the power output, it represents a significant development in modern combat applications. You sound like a technical manual, Todoroki observed, though there was no humor in his voice. What Ida means is that you looked like you could have ended that fight in about 3 different ways, and you chose the one that kept everyone alive. That's good, right? Izuku asked, though something in their expressions suggested it wasn't that simple. It's complicated, Uraraka said quietly. The way you moved, the decisions you made, it was like watching someone with decades of combat experience, not a first-year student. And she struggled for words. That's kind of scary. The admission hit harder than Izuku had expected. These were his friends, people who'd known him since the beginning of the school year. If they were finding his transformation unsettling, what must everyone else be thinking? I'm still me, he said, echoing words he'd spoken to All Might days earlier. These abilities, they don't change who I am at my core, don't they? Todoroki's heterochromatic gaze was sharp, analytical. Because the person who walked into that situation last night and systematically dismantled 3 enhanced nomas, That person thought like a tactician, not a rescue hero. Every move was calculated for maximum efficiency with minimum collateral damage. And that's bad. It's different, Todoroki said carefully. Different in a way that makes people wonder what other capabilities you've been hiding. Before Izuku could respond, the cafeteria's mood shifted again. Students were checking their phones, expressions growing alarmed as they processed whatever they were reading. "What's happening?" Uraraka asked, pulling out her own device. "News alert," someone called from across the room. "The League of Villains just released a statement. They're claiming responsibility for last night's attacks." Izuku's blood went cold. He pulled out his phone and found the news article that was already trending across every social media platform. The headline made his stomach drop. Villain League declares war on false heroes. Specifically targets UA student. The article contained a video message from Shigaraki, sitting in what looked like the same bar where they'd met with Stain months ago. But his demeanor was different now, more focused, more dangerous. "Heroes have grown weak," Shigaraki's recorded voice said, his tone carrying a certainty that was somehow more unsettling than his usual rage. "They hide behind rules and regulations, choosing comfort over effectiveness. But some still remember what real power looks like." The video cut to footage from the night before, Izuku's ninth form tearing through the enhanced Nomus with surgical precision. "This is what strength without compromise looks like," Shigaraki continued. "And it represents everything wrong with hero society. Power like this should serve a greater purpose than protecting a system that breeds weakness." The message was clear. Izuku had been marked as a target, his abilities identified as something the League wanted to corrupt or destroy. "They're coming after you," Todoroki said quietly, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Let them come," a familiar voice said from behind them. They turned to see Bakugo approaching their table, his expression carrying a dangerous kind of determination. "Anyone stupid enough to target Deku is going to find out exactly what happens when you threaten someone under my protection." "Kachan, no." Bakugo sat down heavily, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the conversation. "You want to know what's different about him? I'll tell you. He's finally stopped apologizing for being stronger than everyone else, and it's about damn time." The silence that followed was profound. Around them, the cafeteria had gone quiet again, students processing the implications of what Bakugo had just said. "Is that what you think this is about?" Uraraka asked. "Him getting stronger, I think," Bakugo said, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean in closer. "That Deku's been carrying power he didn't ask for, memories that don't belong to him, and the weight of everyone's expectations. And instead of letting it break him, he's figured out how to use it to protect people." He looked directly at Izuku. "The problem isn't that you've changed. The problem is that everyone else is too comfortable with weakness to recognize strength when they see it." The evening training session was supposed to be routine. Izuku stood in the modified facility that had been constructed specifically for his use. Reinforced walls, enhanced safety systems, and monitoring equipment that could track power outputs across multiple spectrums. All Might stood at the observation window, watching as Izuku worked through increasingly complex combinations of one for all and moon breathing techniques. "Try integrating the transparent world with 15%, All Might called through the intercom. This was the tricky part. The enhanced perception state required absolute focus, but channeling one for all at the same time demanded perfect breath control. Getting both to work together was like trying to solve calculus problems while running a marathon. Izuku settled into the 30-second breathing sequence, feeling his awareness expand as the world shifted into that crystalline clarity. Then, carefully, he began channeling one for all through the same respiratory pattern. The combination was extraordinary. Enhanced senses amplified by limitless power, tactical awareness sharpened to supernatural levels. He could see the structural weak points of the entire facility, predict the exact trajectory of his attacks before making them, calculate optimal force distribution in real time. For 30 seconds, he was omniscient within the limited sphere of his perception. "Fascinating," All Might murmured. "Your awareness seems to expand proportionally to your power output. At 20%, you might be able to analyze an entire city district simultaneously." "The strain increases too," Izuku reported, letting both abilities fade back to baseline. "Much more than that, and I think the sensory overload would be dangerous." "Noted. We'll establish 20% as your current ceiling for combined techniques." All Might made notes on his tablet. "How do you feel about integrating these abilities into regular training with your classmates?" That was the question Izuku had been dreading. His enhanced capabilities were becoming impossible to hide, but using them around his friends felt like admitting that he was fundamentally different from them now. "I'm worried about making them feel inadequate," he said honestly. "The gap between what I can do now and what they can do, it's significant. Leadership often requires managing that kind of disparity," All Might said gently. "The previous users of One for All faced similar challenges. The key is using your abilities to elevate others, not overshadow them." Before Izuku could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as automated systems activated security protocols. "What's happening?" Izuku called out. All Might was already at his communication console, speaking rapidly with someone on the other end. After a moment, he turned back to Izuku with an expression that mixed grim determination with genuine worry. "The League of Villains just attacked the main campus. Multiple breach points, enhanced Nomus, and confirmed sightings of Shigaraki himself." All Might's voice was steady but urgent. "This isn't random destruction, they're looking for something specific." "They're looking for me," Izuku realized, "which is why you're staying right here until we can guarantee your safety." All Might moved toward the exit. "I'm going to support the defense of the school. You remain in this facility until—" "No." The word came out with more force than Izuku had intended, powered by emotions he was still learning to understand. All Might stopped, turning to face him with surprise. "My friends are in danger," Izuku continued, One for All beginning to crackle around him automatically. "My classmates, my teachers, they're under attack because of me. I'm not hiding while other people fight my battles. Young Midoriya, the risks, are exactly why I need to be there." Izuku moved toward the facility's exit, power building around him like a visible aura. "This is what One for All is for, isn't it? Protecting people who can't protect themselves." All Might studied him for a moment, seeing something in his expression that made his objections die unspoken. Finally, he nodded. "Then we go together, but you follow my lead, understand? No improvisation, no unnecessary risks." "Understood." As they prepared to leave, Izuku felt the familiar whisper of Kokushibo's voice in the back of his mind. Finally. Time to show them what real power accomplishes. But for the first time since the memories had awakened, he didn't find the thought disturbing. Because real power, he was beginning to understand, wasn't about domination or proving superiority. Real power was about being strong enough to protect the things that mattered. And tonight, everything that mattered to him was under attack. The campus looked like a battlefield painted in moonlight. Izuku and All Might arrived to find UA's main courtyard transformed into a war zone of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, while the distant sounds of combat echoed from multiple directions across the school grounds. "Status report," All Might barked into his communication device as they approached the main building. Aizawa's voice crackled through the static. 7 breach points, 15 enhanced Nomus confirmed, and Shigaraki's making his way toward the dormitories. "He's not engaging our response teams, just moving through them like they're obstacles." "He's hurting us," Izuku realized, enhanced perception already mapping the attack pattern. The breach points, the Namu positions, they're designed to funnel defenders away from specific areas. All Might's expression darkened. "Away from what?" "From me." Izuku activated the transparent world, letting 30 seconds of controlled breathing expand his awareness across the entire campus. Through walls and chaos, he could see the tactical picture emerging. The dormitories are the real target. He's using the main assault as a distraction while a smaller force moves to secure the civilian students. "Hostages," All Might breathed. The strategy was elegant in its ruthlessness. Force the heroes to choose between defending the school and protecting the students. Create a scenario where any response would leave something vital exposed. "Can you see your classmates?" All Might asked as they sprinted toward the dormitory complex. Izuku pushed his enhanced senses to their limit, searching for familiar energy signatures among the chaos. Most of Class 1A is in the main building, helping with evacuation, but Kachan, Todoroki, and Ida, they're not with the group. "Where are they?" Moving toward the dormitories. "Same route we're taking." Despite everything, Izuku felt a surge of pride. His friends had reached the same tactical conclusion he had, probably within minutes of the attack beginning. They rounded the corner to find the dormitory courtyard in the grip of systematic destruction. 3 Nomus, larger and more sophisticated than any Izuku had seen before, were methodically tearing through the building's defenses, while a 4th figure stood in the center of the chaos, orchestrating the assault with casual precision. Tomura Shigaraki looked different than in the videos. More focused, more dangerous. The manic energy that had characterized his previous appearances had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the destruction with the detached interest of someone solving a particularly engaging puzzle. "Ah," Shigaraki said without turning around. "The guest of honor arrives." The Nomas stopped their assault immediately, turning toward Izuku and All Might with disturbing coordination. But what made Izuku's blood run cold wasn't their size or obvious enhancements, it was the intelligence in their eyes. These weren't mindless weapons, they were thinking, adapting, learning from each moment of combat. "You know," Shigaraki continued, finally turning to face them, "I was beginning to think you'd decided to hide after all. How disappointing that would have been." "What do you want, Shigaraki?" All Might demanded, his muscles already beginning to swell as he prepared for combat. "What I've always wanted. To tear down the pillars of this rotting society and rebuild something honest." Shigaraki's smile was sharp and humorless. "But first, I want to see what our reincarnated demon is really capable of when the stakes are personal." He gestured, and one of the Nomas moved toward the dormitory with clear intent. Its hand, modified with what looked like a variant of Shigaraki's decay quirk, reached toward the building's foundation. "Stop," Izuku said, one for all beginning to crackle around him automatically. "Make me?" The casual way Shigaraki said it, like he was discussing the weather, made something snap inside Izuku's chest. These were his friends' homes. His classmates who'd accepted him despite his secrets, who'd stood by him even when they didn't understand what was happening. 10th form, drilling slashes, moon through bamboo leaves. The technique exploded out of him with more power than he'd ever channeled before. Multiple crescent blades spun through the air in a complex spiral formation, each one aimed not to kill but to disable. The Namo reaching for the dormitory found its arms severed cleanly at 3 separate joints. The second creature took precise strikes to its enhanced musculature that left it functional but significantly weakened. The third Namo, however, was ready for him. It moved with liquid grace, using some kind of speed enhancement to flow between the crescents like they were standing still. Its counterattack came in the form of massive fists wreathed in destructive energy, forcing Izuku to abandon his ground position and take to the air using controlled bursts of one for all. "Interesting," Shigaraki observed, apparently unperturbed by the fact that his carefully coordinated assault had been disrupted in seconds. "The precision is impressive, but you're still thinking like a hero. Trying to disable rather than eliminate threats." The flying Namu pursued Izuku into the air, its enhanced physicality letting it match his OFA-boosted jumps. But fighting airborne was exactly what the moon-breathing techniques had been designed for: fluid movement through 3-dimensional space, attacks that could come from any angle. 8th form, Moon Dragon Ringtail. This time he pushed one for all to 8%, feeling the breathing pattern strain to contain that much raw power. The result was spectacular, a massive crescent that curved through the air like a living thing, splitting into smaller blades that pursued the Namu with impossible persistence. The creature tried to dodge, but the crescents followed its movement patterns, adjusting trajectory in real time based on Izuku's enhanced perception. When they struck, the Namu didn't just fall. It came apart in precisely calibrated sections, each cut designed to incapacitate without causing permanent destruction of the base organism. "Very good," Shigaraki said, applauding slowly, "though I notice you're still holding back. That technique could have been lethal if you'd chosen to make it so." "I don't kill," Izuku said, landing lightly in the courtyard. "No," Shigaraki agreed, "but Kokushibo did, quite efficiently from what I understand. Tell me, do you ever wonder what he would have done in this situation?" The question hit harder than any physical attack could have. Because Izuku did know what Kokushibo would have done. The memories were crystal clear on that point: permanent solutions to permanent problems, efficiency over mercy, victory through overwhelming superiority. 3 strikes whispered the familiar voice in his head. Upper moon breathing, first through 3rd forms in sequence. They'd all be dead before they could threaten anyone again. "I'm not him," Izuku said out loud, as much to convince himself as to answer Shigaraki. "Aren't you?" Shigaraki's smile grew wider. "Because that voice in your head, the one telling you exactly how to end this quickly, that's not going away. It's getting stronger every time you use those techniques, isn't it?" Before Izuku could respond, explosions lit up the night sky behind him. He spun around to see 3 familiar figures approaching at high speed. Bakugo using controlled blasts for propulsion, Todoroki creating ice slides for rapid movement, and Ida's engines carrying him in precise vectors between obstacles. His backup had arrived. About time you showed up, Bakugo called out, landing with a controlled explosion that cracked the concrete. We've been dealing with Namu scouts for the past 10 minutes. The main assault was a distraction, Todoroki observed, his heterochromatic gaze taking in the tactical situation instantly. They wanted to isolate specific targets. How many civilians? Ida asked, his formal tone carrying genuine concern. Evacuated 15 minutes ago, Izuku replied, relief flooding through him. But there are more nomas moving through the main campus, and Shigaraki's been testing you, Shigaraki interrupted pleasantly. Seeing if you'd prioritize efficiency over your precious moral constraints. The answer, I'm happy to report, is that you're still disappointingly heroic. He gestured again, and the remaining nomas began moving in coordinated patterns that forced the group to spread out across the courtyard. But something was different now. Instead of the overwhelming pressure Izuku had felt when facing them alone, he could see tactical opportunities opening up. "Kachan, can you keep the big one busy?" Izuku called out, already moving into position. "Can I?" Bakugo's grin was sharp and dangerous. "Try to keep up, Deku." The coordination that followed felt natural in a way that surprised all of them. Bakugo's explosive mobility created openings that Todoroki exploited with precisely placed ice barriers. Ida's speed let him deliver crucial strikes at exactly the right moments. And Izuku finally stopped holding back, not completely, not enough to cross the lines he'd drawn for himself, but enough to show his friends what he'd really been capable of all along. Seventh form, mirror of misfortune, moonlit. The crescents that emerged weren't the restrained versions he'd been using for weeks. They were precise, deadly, and held back only by his conscious decision not to aim for vital points. They wove between his teammates' attacks with impossible accuracy, striking exactly where they needed to strike to maximize effectiveness while minimizing harm. "Holy shit," Bakugo breathed, watching a Namu collapse as its enhanced musculature was surgically disabled. "You've been holding back that much this whole time?" "Language," Ida said automatically, but his voice carried the same awe. The remaining nomas fell within minutes, their coordination disrupted by attacks that came from angles they couldn't predict or counter. When the dust settled, 4 of UA's most promising students stood in a courtyard filled with unconscious but still breathing enhanced creatures. "Magnificent," Shigaraki said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "Absolutely magnificent. You've learned to use that power with your friends instead of in spite of them. Kokushibo would be proud or perhaps disgusted." "It's hard to say. This ends now," All Might said, stepping forward with muscles bulging and steam rising from his enhanced form. "Surrender and we can what?" Shigaraki's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Redeem me. Show me the error of my ways, I think not, symbol of peace. This was never about winning or losing. This was about proving a point." He looked directly at Izuku. "You have power that could reshape society, techniques that predate the quirk system itself, and you choose to use them to maintain the status quo. That's your choice, and I respect it. But choices have consequences." The ground beneath Shigaraki began to decay, spreading outward in perfect circles that consumed everything they touched. Not the wild, uncontrolled destruction he'd shown in previous encounters, but systematic, calculated erasure. "You want to save everyone," Shigaraki said, his voice carrying over the sound of disintegrating concrete. "Then save everyone, all at once, right now." The decay spread faster, threatening to engulf not just the courtyard but the entire dormitory complex. Within seconds, it would reach the main campus, the evacuation zones, the dozens of students and faculty who'd thought they were safe. Izuku felt time slow as his enhanced perception kicked in automatically. He could see the decay's progression, calculate its rate of expansion, predict exactly which areas would be affected and when. He could also see the solution, multiple precise strikes that would disrupt the quirk's progression at key points, creating safe zones that could be expanded outward. But it would require perfect execution under impossible time pressure. A single mistake would mean dozens of deaths. "This is what the power is for," whispered Kokushibo's voice, "not games or moral victories. This is why strength exists." For once, Izuku found himself agreeing completely. 11th form, Moonbow Half Moon. The technique that emerged was unlike anything he'd attempted before. Instead of individual crescents, he created a wave of silver light that swept outward in expanding rings, each one precisely calibrated to counter the decay's progression. One for all at 12% provided the raw power, while centuries of inherited discipline provided the control necessary to make it work. The two forces met in the center of the courtyard and simply canceled each other out. Decay met something that cut through its fundamental structure, while the crescents met something that consumed their energy before they could cause collateral damage. When it was over, the courtyard looked like a perfectly preserved snapshot of destruction. Decay stopped in its tracks, crescents frozen in midair for a few seconds before dissolving harmlessly. "Beautiful," Shigaraki said quietly. "Absolutely beautiful. That's the level of power I wanted to see." He was already backing away, his objective apparently achieved. "This has been educational for everyone involved. But I think we've learned what we came here to learn." "Where are you going?" All Might demanded. "Nowhere special, but don't worry, we'll be in touch. After all, our friend with the ancient memories has proven himself quite worthy of continued attention." A warp gate opened behind Shigaraki, Kurogiri's distinctive portal shimmering in the moonlight. As the villain leader stepped toward it, he turned back one last time. "Oh, and Izuku, the next time we meet, I won't be testing you. I'll be recruiting you, because power like yours shouldn't be wasted on a society that doesn't appreciate it." Then he was gone, leaving them standing in a destroyed courtyard surrounded by unconscious Nomus and the lingering scent of decay. "Is everyone all right?" All Might asked, though his attention was focused entirely on Izuku. "We're fine," Bakugo said, though his voice carried a note of something that might have been concern. "But Deku, I'm okay," Izuku said quickly. "Just processing." But that wasn't entirely true. The combination of One for All and the 11th form had pushed him further than he'd ever gone before, and the experience had been intoxicating in ways he wasn't entirely comfortable with. For those few seconds, he'd felt completely in control of the situation, capable of achieving any outcome he chose. It was the closest he'd ever come to understanding why Kokushibo had fallen to pride. "We should check on the other students," Todoroki said practically. "Make sure the evacuation was successful." As they made their way toward the main campus, Izuku found himself walking beside Bakugo, who was being unusually quiet. "That was some serious power back there," Bakugo said eventually. "Yeah, you handled it well, stayed focused on protecting people instead of showing off." Izuku glanced at his friend, surprised by the genuine approval in his voice. "Thanks, don't thank me yet," Bakugo said, though his tone was more concerned than threatening. "Because now everyone knows what you're really capable of. The footage from tonight is going to be analyzed by every intelligence agency in the world. And they're all going to reach the same conclusion Shigaraki did. That kind of power doesn't belong in the hands of a 17-year-old student, no matter how good his intentions are." As they walked through the damaged campus, Izuku couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed again. The careful balance he'd been trying to maintain, between power and restraint, between Izuku Midoriya and the memories of Kokushibo, had been tested under the most extreme circumstances possible. He'd passed the test. But in doing so, he'd revealed capabilities that would make him a target for forces far more dangerous than the League of Villains. Above them, the moon hung full and bright, casting silver light over the destruction. For the first time since all of this began, it looked less like judgment and more like a promise. The question was, a promise of what? The attack came 3 days later at the moment when everyone thought they were safe. Izuku was in the modified training facility, working through advanced combinations of One for All and Moon breathing under All Might's supervision, when every alarm in the building started screaming simultaneously. But this wasn't the sharp, urgent sound of a standard emergency. This was the deep, bone-rattling wail reserved for the highest threat level UA had ever classified. "Code Black," All Might said, his face going pale as he read the emergency display. "All for One has been detected on campus." The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. Code Black meant imminent threat to national security. It meant the kind of danger that could reshape society if left unchecked. It meant the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red light, but the message was clear. All for One wasn't just on campus, he was in the building. Close enough to interfere with UA systems, close enough to be hunting specific targets. "We need to evacuate," All Might said, already moving toward the emergency protocols. "Get you somewhere safe while..." The wall exploded inward. Not blasted apart or melted through, simply removed, as if it had never existed in the first place. Through the gap stepped a figure that radiated menace like a physical force, dressed in an expensive suit that somehow remained pristine despite having just walked through several tons of reinforced concrete. All for One looked exactly like the intelligence photos, but seeing him in person was like staring into an abyss that stared back. His face was a ruin of scar tissue and surgical reconstruction, but his presence filled the room in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "Toshinori," All for One said pleasantly, his cultured voice carrying easily over the alarms. "You look well. Retirement agrees with you. Stay back, All Might warned, his body already beginning to steam as he prepared to transform. Whatever you want? Oh, I think we both know what I want. All for One's attention shifted to Izuku, and suddenly the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. I want to see what 4 centuries of jealousy and pride have produced when filtered through modern heroic ideals. Izuku felt One for All crackling around him automatically, but something was wrong. The energy that normally flowed so smoothly felt sluggish, constrained, like it was fighting against invisible barriers. Fascinating, All for One observed. The power recognizes me as a threat and is trying to protect itself. But that won't be necessary for long. He raised one hand, and Izuku felt something trying to tear itself out of his chest. Not physical pain, something deeper, more fundamental. Like someone was trying to unravel the very core of what made his abilities work. The quirk theft, he gasped, understanding flooding through him. You're trying to steal One for All. Among other things, All for One's scarred features twisted into what might have been a smile. Though I must admit, your secondary ability is proving surprisingly resistant. Tell me, do you understand what the moon-breathing techniques really are? The question came with another wave of that tearing sensation, but this time Izuku was ready for it. He activated the transparent world, letting 30 seconds of controlled breathing expand his awareness even as AFO's power tried to disrupt his respiratory patterns. What he saw made his blood run cold. All for One wasn't just trying to steal his quirks, he was trying to steal the memories themselves. Tendrils of corrupted energy were reaching into Izuku's mind, searching for the specific neural pathways that contained Kokushibo's inherited knowledge. You can see it now, All for One said, apparently reading his expression. Good, the transparent world was always the most useful of the old techniques. It will make this process much more interesting. I won't let you, let me. All for One's laugh was genuinely amused. My dear boy, you misunderstand the situation entirely. This isn't a negotiation. This is a harvest. The pressure increased dramatically, and Izuku felt One for All beginning to slip away from him like water through his fingers. But as the power started to drain, something unexpected happened. The moon-breathing techniques began to anchor themselves to One for All's energy, the 2 power sources intertwining in ways that made them impossible to separate cleanly. AFO's theft quirk, designed to extract individual abilities, suddenly found itself trying to unravel something that had become fundamentally integrated. Interesting, All for One murmured, his tone shifting from casual confidence to genuine fascination. The breathing techniques aren't just using One for All as fuel, they're binding to it at the quantum level. Separating them would require, he paused, apparently running calculations in his head, would require destroying both in the process, he finished. How disappointingly clever of you. All Might chose that moment to attack. The symbol of peace exploded into his muscle form with enough force to crack the reinforced floor, his fist aimed directly at AFO's center of mass. But the ancient villain was ready for him, deflecting the blow with a combination of strength enhancement and kinetic redirection that sent All Might crashing through the far wall. Really, Toshinori, AFO said without taking his eyes off Izuku. We both know you're past your prime. This is between me and the inheritor of techniques I remember from a much more interesting time. He knew Kokushibo personally, Izuku realized with growing horror. He was there when the transformation happened. You're wondering how much I know, AFO continued, apparently reading his thoughts from his expression. The answer is everything. I was the one who offered Michikatsu the power to surpass his brother. I was the one who turned a petty, jealous swordsman into Upper Moon 1. The words hit like physical blows, confirming Izuku's worst fears about the memories he carried. But more than that, they revealed AFO's real objective. You don't just want my quirks, Izuku said. You want to finish what you started 400 years ago. Very good. Yes, I want to see if this time I can create a demon who doesn't eventually disappoint me. AFO's smile was sharp and predatory. Kokushibo had such potential, but he never truly embraced what he'd become, always holding back, always remembering his human limitations. The theft pressure increased again, but this time AFO wasn't trying to steal the abilities cleanly. He was trying to corrupt them, twist them into something that would serve his purposes rather than Izuku's. Let him, whispered Kokushibo's voice in Izuku's mind, accept the power he offers. Become what I never had the courage to become completely. For a terrifying moment, Izuku found himself considering it. The voice was stronger now, more persuasive, carrying with it memories of what unlimited power felt like. No more holding back, no more careful restraint, no more agonizing over the moral implications of every action. Just strength, pure, unlimited, intoxicating strength. I can see the temptation in your eyes, AFO said softly. The same hunger that drove Michikatsu to accept my gift. You want to be strong enough that no one can ever threaten the people you care about again. Izuku struggled against the pressure, both external and internal. I won't become what he became. What he became was honest, AFO replied. Honest about what power really means, what it really costs, what it really allows. Everything else is just comfortable self-deception. 11th form. Moonbow half moon. Izuku poured 15% of one for all into the technique, creating a crescent wave that swept across the entire facility. But AFO was ready for it, using a combination of stolen quirks to create barriers, redirect energy, and counter the attack at multiple points simultaneously. Impressive power, AFO observed as the crescents dissipated harmlessly around him. But you're still thinking like a hero, precise, controlled, measured. Kokushibo fought like a force of nature, overwhelming, relentless, without concern for collateral damage. He gestured, and Izuku felt the theft pressure focus specifically on the moon-breathing techniques. AFO wasn't trying to steal them anymore. He was trying to corrupt them, twist them back into the demonic arts they'd originally been. Let him, the voice urged. Feel what real power was like before it was constrained by human morality. The corruption spread through Izuku's breathing patterns like poison, and for a moment he felt something that terrified him more than all for one's presence. The absolute certainty that he could kill everyone in the building without effort or remorse. It felt wonderful. There it is, AFO said with satisfaction, the moment of recognition. When you understand what those techniques were really designed for. Izuku fought against the sensation, but it was like trying to hold back an ocean with his bare hands. The corrupted breathing patterns felt more natural than the controlled versions he'd been practicing, more in tune with what the abilities had originally been created to accomplish. This is what strength looks like. Kokushibo's voice was stronger now, more insistent. This is what I could have been if I'd stopped pretending to be something I wasn't. Surrender to it, AFO said, his voice carrying hypnotic undertones that made the offer sound reasonable. Accept what you really are, and I'll give you power beyond imagination. Refuse, and I'll simply take what I need and leave you as a broken shell of your former self. The choice crystallized in Izuku's mind with perfect clarity. He could give in to the corruption, embrace the demonic heritage that came with Kokushibo's memories, and become strong enough to protect everyone he cared about through overwhelming force. Or he could refuse, probably die in the process, and leave his friends vulnerable to whatever AFO had planned next. It should have been an easy choice. The pragmatic choice. The choice that guaranteed the safety of everyone who mattered to him. Do it, Kokushibo urged. Be what I never had the courage to become. But then Izuku remembered something All Might had said during their first real conversation about One for All. Power shared freely is power used responsibly. The memories he carried weren't just his burden. They were his responsibility to everyone who'd been affected by Kokushibo's fall. Not just the people he'd killed, but the brother he'd betrayed, the cause he'd abandoned, the human connections he'd severed in pursuit of individual strength. No, Izuku said quietly. The word seemed to echo in the damaged training facility, carrying weight that had nothing to do with volume. No, AFO's expression shifted from confidence to genuine surprise. You're refusing ultimate power to maintain your pretty moral constraints. I'm refusing to repeat someone else's mistakes. Izuku felt One for All, and the moon-breathing techniques begin to resonate with each other in new ways. The corruption AFO had introduced being burned away by something deeper than either power source alone. 12th form Waxing Moonbow. The technique that emerged was unlike anything Kokushibo had ever achieved. Instead of drawing power from pride, jealousy, and the need to prove superiority, it drew from connection to his friends, his mentors, his responsibility to be better than the darkness he carried. The crescent that formed was massive, spanning the entire facility, but it wasn't designed to destroy or dominate. It was designed to cleanse, to cut away corruption at its source while leaving everything else untouched. AFO tried to counter it with a dozen different stolen quirks, but the 12th form wasn't just power, it was purpose. It cut through his defenses not because it was stronger, but because it was more pure in its intention. When it struck, AFO didn't collapse or scream. He simply stepped backward, his scarred features carrying an expression of genuine respect. Magnificent, he said quietly. Absolutely magnificent. You've surpassed your predecessor in ways I didn't think were possible. The theft pressure disappeared completely, leaving Izuku's abilities fully intact but fundamentally changed. The corruption was gone, burned away by the 12th form, but something new had taken its place. A perfect integration of one for all and moon breathing that felt more natural than breathing itself. "This isn't over," AFO said, already beginning to retreat toward the hole he'd made in the wall. "But it is. Postponed. You've proven something I thought was impossible." "What's that?" "That power and principle can coexist without either being compromised." AFO's smile was sharp but somehow approving. "I look forward to seeing what you do with that knowledge." Then he was gone, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and the lingering sense that something fundamental had just changed in the balance of power between heroes and villains. All Might struggled through the rubble, his muscle form flickering as his time limit approached. "Are you all right? What happened? I felt." "I chose," Izuku said simply. "Chose what?" Izuku looked down at his hands, watching green and silver energy dance between his fingers in perfect harmony. For the first time since the memories had awakened, Kokushibo's voice was completely silent. Not gone, he could still feel the presence, the knowledge, the inherited techniques, but quiet, at peace. "I chose to be better than my predecessor," Izuku said. "Both of them." Outside, the moon was setting, its silver light giving way to the first hints of dawn. The blood moon phase was ending, taking with it the last echoes of an ancient jealousy that had consumed one man and nearly claimed another. What remained was something new. Something that honored both the power of the past and the promise of the future. Something that was uniquely, undeniably Izuku Midoriya. The debriefing took 18 hours. Izuku sat in a sterile conference room deep within UACE administrative wing, surrounded by representatives from the Hero Public Safety Commission, the National Police Agency, and several government departments he'd never heard of. All of them wanted to understand exactly what had happened during his confrontation with All for One, and more importantly, what it meant for Japan's security going forward. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said Commissioner Yamada, a severe woman with steel-gray hair who'd been asking increasingly pointed questions for the past 6 hours. "You successfully repelled an attack by All for One, the most dangerous villain in modern history, using techniques that predate the quirk system entirely." "That's correct," Izuku replied, though his voice was hoarse from repetition. "And these techniques are now permanently integrated with One for All in ways that make them impossible to separate or steal." "As far as we can determine, yes." Commissioner Yamada exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. "The power output readings from your confrontation suggest capabilities that exceed most professional heroes by significant margins. That level of strength in the hands of a 17-year-old student represents complications." All Might, who'd been silent for most of the session, finally spoke up. "Young Midoriya has demonstrated nothing but responsible use of his abilities. Every decision he's made has prioritized civilian safety and minimal collateral damage." "This time," another official interjected, "but power on this scale requires oversight, safeguards, protocols to ensure it can't be misused." Izuku had been expecting this. The footage from the AFO encounter had already been classified at the highest levels, but enough people had witnessed the confrontation to make complete secrecy impossible. Word was spreading through the hero community about the student who'd forced All for One himself to retreat. "What kind of oversight?" he asked. Commissioner Yamada consulted her tablet. "Weekly psychological evaluations. Monthly power assessments. Mandatory consultation before engaging in any combat situation rated above Class B threat level, and permanent assignment of a government liaison to monitor your activities." The terms were restrictive, but not unreasonable. Izuku had been preparing for something like this since the night he'd revealed his abilities publicly. "In exchange, you continue your education at UA under enhanced security protocols. Upon graduation, you'll be fast-tracked for professional hero licensing with the understanding that certain, exceptional circumstances may require your involvement." It was a deal, essentially. Accept government oversight in exchange for the freedom to keep developing his abilities and eventually use them professionally. The alternative, left unspoken but clearly implied, was containment as a potential national security threat. "I accept," Izuku said. The announcement came 3 days later, carefully worded and deliberately vague. Hero Commission announces new protocols for exceptional ability oversight in response to recent developments in quirk evolution and enhancement. The Hero Public Safety Commission has implemented expanded monitoring procedures for individuals demonstrating capabilities beyond standard classification parameters. Most people would read it as bureaucratic expansion of existing programs. But within the hero community, everyone understood what it really meant. They'd found someone powerful enough to require entirely new categories of regulation. The media speculation was immediate and intense. Every news outlet in the country ran analysis pieces about the mystery student whose abilities had apparently impressed government officials enough to warrant policy changes. Izuku's name wasn't mentioned officially, but enough details leaked through social media and witness accounts to make his identity an open secret. Class 1A handled the revelation better than Izuku had expected. "So you're basically a government superhero now," Kaminari said during lunch, apparently finding the whole situation amusing. "That's actually pretty cool." "It's not that simple," Izuku began. "Sure it is," Kirishima interrupted with his usual grin. "You've got power, you're using it responsibly, and the adults want to make sure you keep using it responsibly. Sounds manly to me. The oversight requirements seem excessive," Ida observed, though his tone was more concerned than critical. "Weekly evaluations would interfere significantly with normal academic schedules." "Nothing about this situation is normal," Todoroki said quietly. "The question is whether the restrictions are worth the freedom to keep training." It was Uraraka who asked the question everyone was thinking: "Are you okay with all this?" The monitoring, the restrictions, having your life planned out by committee, Izuku considered the question seriously. A month ago, the idea of government oversight would have terrified him. The thought of officials analyzing his every move, questioning his decisions, treating him like a potential threat rather than a hero in training. But now, after weeks of carrying secrets that had threatened to crush him, after nights spent wondering if he was becoming something monstrous, after the constant fear that his inherited memories would overwrite his actual personality, "It's a relief, honestly," he said. "Having people whose job it is to make sure I don't lose sight of what's important, knowing that if I start to drift towards something dangerous, there are safeguards in place." "You really think you might?" Uraraka asked softly. Izuku looked around the table at his friends, people who'd accepted his secrets, supported his struggles, and trusted him to make the right choices even when he wasn't sure what those choices should be. "I think anyone with this kind of power should be worried about what they might become," he said. "The moment you stop questioning yourself is the moment you start becoming someone else." The new training regimen was unlike anything UA had ever implemented. Instead of the standard rotation through various facilities, Izuku now had access to a purpose-built complex that could withstand the output levels his combined abilities were capable of generating. The space was larger than most professional hero agencies, equipped with monitoring systems that tracked everything from power output to psychological stress markers. More importantly, it was designed for collaborative training. The goal, All Might explained as Class 1A gathered in the facility for their first group session, is integration. Young Midoriya's abilities are most effective when used in coordination with others, not as a replacement for teamwork. Izuku appreciated what his mentor was doing. By framing the enhanced training as collaborative rather than remedial, All Might was helping maintain the class dynamic while accommodating Izuku's unique requirements. "Pairs first," Aizawa instructed from the observation deck. "Midoriya, you're with Bakugo. Everyone else, standard rotation." The sparring session that followed felt like a conversation conducted in explosions and silver light. Bakugo pushed him to use higher power percentages, forcing him to maintain precise control even at 20% one for all output. In return, Izuku's enhanced perception let him predict Bakugo's attack patterns with increasing accuracy, creating openings that his friend could exploit with devastating effect. "Better," Bakugo said when they finally called a halt, both breathing hard but grinning. "You're starting to fight like you actually want to win instead of just avoiding mistakes. Is that good or bad? It's honest." Bakugo's expression grew serious. "For the first time since this whole thing started, you're fighting like yourself instead of like someone pretending to be someone else." The observation was more perceptive than Izuku had expected. He had been fighting differently lately, more decisively, with less second-guessing of his instincts. The integration of One for All and moon breathing had done more than combine two power sources. It had created a synthesis that felt uniquely his own. "Next pairs," Aizawa called out. "Midoriya with Todoroki, Bakugo with Kirishima." The session with Todoroki was different, more technical, focused on precision over power. Todoroki's ice provided perfect targets for crescent techniques, while his fire gave Izuku experience adapting to environmental hazards that could interfere with his breathing patterns. "Your control has improved significantly," Todoroki observed during a brief rest period. The techniques look less like borrowed abilities and more like natural extensions of your movement. They're starting to feel that way too, Izuku admitted. Like they belong to me instead of just being something I can access. That's important, Todoroki said quietly. Power that doesn't feel natural tends to become either a crutch or a burden. Integration means making it part of who you are rather than something you use. The insight was typical of Todoroki, analytical, thoughtful, and surprisingly profound. It also highlighted something Izuku had been noticing in all his interactions lately. His classmates were treating him differently, but not in the way he'd feared. Instead of walking on eggshells or maintaining careful distance, they were engaging with him as someone who'd grown into his abilities rather than someone who'd been overwhelmed by them. The dynamics had shifted, but the fundamental relationships remained intact. How do you handle it? Izuku asked during their next break. Having power that makes you different from everyone around you. By remembering that the power isn't what makes me who I am, Todoroki replied. It's a tool I can choose to use well or poorly. The choice is what matters. All Might found him on the rooftop after training, standing in the same spot where Izuku had first practiced the inherited techniques in secret. Nostalgic, All Might asked, settling beside him with the careful movements of someone whose body had been through too much. Something like that. Izuku looked out over the campus, noting how different everything appeared now compared to just a few weeks ago. I keep thinking about how terrified I was when this all started, how certain I was that these memories would turn me into something I didn't want to be. And now I think I was asking the wrong question. Izuku held up his hand, watching green and silver energy dance between his fingers in perfect harmony. It was never about whether the memories would change me, it was about what I'd choose to do with the change. All Might smiled, and for the first time in months, it looked completely genuine. That's exactly the kind of wisdom the previous users of One for All would want to see in their successor. I still hear his voice sometimes, Izuku admitted. Kokushibo, not as often and not as insistently, but it's still there. Commenting on fights, suggesting more efficient solutions, remembering what unlimited power felt like. And how do you respond? I listen, Izuku said, surprising himself with the answer. Not to follow his advice, but to understand where it comes from. The jealousy, the pride, the need to prove superiority, those impulses exist in everyone. The difference is whether you feed them or starve them. All Might nodded approvingly. The previous users each faced similar temptations. The power to reshape society, to impose your will through force, to solve complex problems with simple violence. One for All amplifies those impulses along with everything else. How did they resist? By remembering what they were fighting for. All Might's expression grew distant, thoughtful. Not what they were fighting against, but what they wanted to protect. The moment you start fighting against something, it becomes about proving you're stronger. The moment you start fighting for something, it becomes about being worthy of what you're protecting. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the campus. In the distance, Izuku could see his classmates heading back to the dorms, their voices carrying on the evening air as they discussed the day's training. I have a confession, All Might said eventually. What? I was wrong to doubt you. Not just about One for All, but about your ability to handle this entire situation. All Might's voice carried genuine regret. I let fear cloud my judgment, made you carry this burden alone when you should have had support from the beginning. You were protecting people, Izuku said. Including me, I don't blame you for being cautious. Perhaps, but caution becomes cowardice when it prevents you from helping someone who needs it. All Might straightened, his expression growing more formal. Which brings me to something I need to say officially. He turned to face Izuku directly, his posture carrying the weight of ceremony. Izuku Midoriya, 9th user of One for All, you have proven yourself worthy of the power and the responsibility it represents. More than worthy, you have elevated both to heights the previous users never imagined possible. The words hit harder than Izuku had expected. After weeks of uncertainty, of wondering whether he was becoming someone he didn't recognize, to hear his mentor's complete approval felt like coming home. From this point forward, All Might continued, you no longer need my constant guidance. You found your own path, developed your own understanding of what it means to be a hero. I'll always be available if you need advice, but the decisions and the consequences are yours to make. It was graduation, in a sense. The formal acknowledgement that Izuku had moved beyond being a student receiving instruction to being a hero, making his own choices. Thank you, Izuku said, and meant it completely. The moon was full when he finally made his way back to the dorms, casting silver light across the campus that no longer felt ominous or judgmental. Just beautiful in the way that natural things were beautiful when you stopped being afraid of them. In the common room, he found most of Class 1A gathered around the television, watching news coverage of the day's hero activities. The volume was low, but the footage showed professional heroes working together to handle a villain incident with the kind of coordination and efficiency that made the job look routine. "Hey Deku," Uraraka called out when she saw him. "Want to join us? We're watching the evening news and placing bets on which hero agencies will try to recruit us after graduation." The casual invitation, the easy inclusion in normal student activities, felt like a small miracle. For weeks, he'd been afraid that his changed abilities would isolate him from his friends permanently. Instead, they'd adapted to accommodate his growth while maintaining the relationships that had always mattered most. "Sure," he said, settling onto the couch beside them. "I'm betting on Endeavor's agency," Todoroki said dryly. "He's probably already planning the paperwork." "Fat chance," Bakugo snorted. "They'll want people who can actually work as a team, not just show off their daddy issues." Says the person whose entire fighting style is based on making the biggest explosions possible, Kirishima pointed out with a grin. The gentle teasing continued around him, familiar and comfortable in ways that reminded Izuku why these relationships had been worth protecting. Power was important, abilities were useful, but this, the easy camaraderie of people who understood and accepted each other, this was what made everything else worthwhile. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but when he checked it, the message made him smile. "Excellent work today. The integration protocols are proceeding better than expected. Keep up the good progress." Commissioner Yamada, even the government oversight felt less intimidating now. Not because the requirements had changed, but because he understood his own relationship to power well enough to appreciate external accountability. "I am not my past," he thought, watching his friends debate hero rankings with passionate intensity. "I am not Kokushibo's jealousy or all for one's corruption or anyone else's expectations. I am my choices." Outside, the full moon reached its zenith, casting everything in silver light that transformed the familiar campus into something magical. But for the first time since the memories had awakened, Izuku didn't feel the need to step outside and practice forms under its glow. The moon would always be there. The power would always be available. The choice of how to use both would always be his to make. But right now, he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by friends, planning for a future that felt bright with possibility, carrying power that served something larger than himself. The blood moon phase was over. What remained was simply light, beautiful and useful and no longer frightening. What remained was home. What a ride! Deku went from "I might be turning into a demon" to actually, "I choose who I want to be and honestly, chef's kiss." The man really looked all for one dead in the face and said thanks but no thanks to corruption because he figured out that real strength isn't about being the strongest, it's about protecting what matters. Which scene hit you the hardest? That Bakugo rooftop talk? The moment he unlocked the 12th form? Let me know in the comments. Smash subscribe for more unhinged crossover ideas, and until next time, stay awesome.